which, as you know, began yesterday. And today we have a roundtable which is on job creating economic growth and social protection for addressing multidimensional poverty in South Asia and the aftermath of the pandemic. And to moderate this very important roundtable is Dr. Shamsul Alam, who he is very well known in this South Asia region as member of General Economic Division of the Planning Commission in Bangladesh. And he is a very distinguished economist and former professor in the academic circles, so very well known, very distinguished economist to moderate this session. And then we will have a key presentation by Dr. Sabina Al-Kire, whom you know as the champion of this multidimensional poverty, pioneer champion of multidimensional poverty. And she is working in different South Asian countries, currently joining us from Bhutan. So, and I'm sure Dr. Alam will take us through this very important roundtable, and will introduce all other speakers, very, distinguished speakers, all of them. So over to you, Dr. Alam.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone from Bangladesh. We are to kick off the session. This is session 3, as you heard. This is a roundtable on job creating economic growth and social protection for addressing multidimensional poverty in South Asia in the aftermath of COVID-19. Our main speaker is Dr. Al-Khair. You all know him. I have nothing to introduce you. May I just directly switch over to Dr. Al-Khair for her presentation, who she will get 10 minutes as of schedule. Sabina Al-Khair, please.
Thank you so much. I need to share my screen. And could I check the time? Is it 10 minutes or 30 minutes?
As it is written in the document, Nagesh, can you help me? It's 10.
Well, Sabina, we thought 10 minutes because we have number of panelists. But if you need a few minutes more, I'm sure the honorable moderator will, allow some little flexibility to you. Because
okay, thank you so very much. I apologize. I must have looked at the wrong version of the schedule. So I will not be able to present all of the quantity, but I will give the story. First of all, I'm just so delighted and honored to be in this interchange. And most of all, I'm looking forward to hearing your inputs and your reflections. I put together some reflections on COVID and MPI. And it is from a multidimensional perspective. That is, before the pandemic, we are recognizing that people who are multidimensionally poor are already battered and diminished in many and various ways. And so multidimensional poverty measures are trying to look at the overlapping dimensions that they experienced before the pandemic, and then thinking about how the pandemic has exacerbated those, and then how multidimensional approaches can and are being used in South Asia to confront those. And so I begin, former Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister Bhutan, Tshering Tobgay, because Bhutan was the first country in South Asia to launch an official national MPI. And from the beginning, it's been recognized, as he put it here, that the multidimensional poverty indices are intended to be policy tools. And in this time of COVID, we need to use them in new ways. So I will address 3 things. First of all, prior to COVID, what were the trends according to the global MPI, very rapidly, that we do with UNDP? Second, how are we assessing the impact of COVID on poverty in South Asia? And third, what are some of the responses of the governments, and of course you are the experts, that have use multidimensional approaches in South Asia. So first, a brief word on a measure which can be compared across all 8 South Asian countries as of this year, because now we include Sri Lanka this year. And it reflects the first SDG goal, the second of 169 targets, and that is to recognize and redress poverty in all its forms and dimensions. And as all MPIs do, we look at the same indicators for each household, and we identify people as poor if they are poor, deprived in a critical mass of indicators at the same time. This has been the approach of multidimensional poverty for a long time, but with COVID and the recognition that comorbidities and overlapping deprivations increase the sadly strong impact of COVID, both on health and on socioeconomic conditions of people, a multidimensional approach has, in a sense, taken a different direction since March. And our research group has been working very strongly since March on COVID responses. So the data in South Asia that we use are on this screen for the global MPI. I will come to national separately. We updated Sri Lanka and Bangladesh this year. Bhutan's data are very old at 2015. Afghanistan and Pakistan and India are 2015-16 data, and the other data sets are as listed. In terms of comparability, all South Asian countries except Afghanistan have all 10 indicators of the global MPI, but child nutrition data are only available for Bangladesh and Bhutan. So just at a glance, the 8 countries using 2018 population data covered 1.8 billion people, and of them, 530 million, that's 29.2%, were multidimensionally poor by the global multidimensional poverty index. And of those, 44.8% are children, less than the global total of 1/2. But 87.7% live in rural areas, more than the global average of 84%. And of those 530 million, 204 million have an extra difficult condition of poverty that we call destitution. But there is a range across countries and across subnational regions. So Maldives and Sri Lanka have the lowest levels of poverty, and Afghanistan the highest, according to our numbers, with 56% of people being poor in Afghanistan and 0.77% in the Maldives. If we look at the middle countries, we can situate them in the global MPI alongside other countries with similar levels of poverty. But national measures obscure a large subnational variation in terms of the level as well as the composition of poverty. And we are able to disaggregate every country except the Maldives subnationally and Sri Lanka. So how are people poor in a comparative perspective across South Asia? This shows the percentage contribution of the 10 indicators of the global MPI. And what is interesting is that in Sri Lanka, about 3% of people are poor. And in India and Nepal, it's in the upper 20s. And yet the composition of poverty is quite similar. The bottom bright red color is the percent contribution, for example, of undernutrition, which is relatively similar across those 3 countries. Whereas educational deprivations contribute more in Pakistan and in Bangladesh relative to the health deprivations. And the living standard contributions are higher in India and Bangladesh as compared, for example, with Pakistan or, of course, the Maldives. One of the features of South Asia has to do with the trends, and so I'll move immediately to them. As we all know, in 10 years, India had a very large reduction in the number of poor people of 270 million, and Bangladesh of 19 million in 5 years. And so just to go into that, and we have changes over time for 5 countries, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Pakistan. And so Bangladesh being the one we just updated, we see that it fell 13 percentage points from 37.6% of people being poor to 24.1% in 5 years. And we can see how it reduced poverty in that every one of the indicators reduced significantly. And recall that if any deprivation of any poor person in a national MPI or in the global MPI is reduced, then MPI goes down. So it's a very sensitive measure to government actions around employment, around schooling, around health and living standards. And in Bangladesh, children were the poorest, which is common, and children also reduced poverty the fastest. So in terms of leaving no one behind, the poorest were progressing fastest. And that also occurred in the subnational regions of Bangladesh, as well as also in other countries. And finally, as is common in South Asia, the reduction of MPI was faster than the reduction of the $1.90 a day poverty. Across the regions of the world, the reason I wanted to show the global MPI numbers is not only because they are comparable, but also because across the world regions, South Asia reduced poverty the fastest, faster than reductions in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's important because the fastest countries to reduce poverty were indeed in sub-Saharan Africa. But in a population-weighted basis, South Asia led the world pre-COVID. So last question in terms of the trends is how fast were they in terms of the SDG goal of cutting the MPI by half between 2015 and 2030? We did 3 different models of projections. And according to all of them, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and were we to include Afghanistan, would be on track to cut their MPI by half in 15 years. But that was pre-COVID, and this seminar focuses on COVID. But I wanted to begin with the pre-COVID to recognize that in accordance with national MPI or the global MPI, there has been a very positive trend in South Asia that maybe is not always recognized and celebrated as much as perhaps it should be in global terms. So with the global MPI, we used World Food Programme and UNESCO predictions, and we simulated 6 scenarios. In the first, people who were poor or were vulnerable, but previously not undernourished, became undernourished, 10%, 25%, or 50% of the people. And in the second, half of all primary school children left school and did not return. And when we implemented these 6 predictive models across 70 countries, we saw that poverty trends are set back between 3 and 10 years. And that global estimate is about the same for South Asia. And so it's a sobering moment to think that even in an MPI like the global that does not include work, for example, which is a priority here, yet progress has potentially been set back. The reason I say potentially is that we are very aware, and as we have heard yesterday and today, many governments are proactively working to confront these potential increases in deprivation so that they never happen. So in the remaining minutes, I simply wanted to draw to your attention some of the ways in which governments have been using multidimensional measures in their COVID response. That is identifying the additional deprivations COVID has introduced and seeking to mitigate them. So I won't spend time on this, but if we look at the global MPI, and we add other dimensions, then we can see overlapping deprivations in hand washing, overcrowding, internet, and domestic violence in different South Asian countries. And we have studies online with that, as well as with overlaps in COVID vulnerabilities, and those are on the website if you are interested. But to look across countries in South Asia and national specific responses, there are quite a number, and I will not have time to present them properly. But these are some of the uses. Identifying the new, simulating the new increases, identifying the people who were not poor before COVID and now are, and preparing for new phases of the pandemic. So to start from an objective point, you may or may not know that already 7 countries in South Asia, 6 countries in South Asia have official national MPIs, and others are under design. And so these cannot be compared across countries, but they are interesting. For example, Afghanistan's MPI includes unemployment, underemployment, dependency ratio, and youth not in employment, education, or training. And so these are variables, of course, that are considerably hit by COVID. Bhutan, Pakistan, they include food security. And so there are interesting variables not in the global MPI.
Dr. Sabina, Dr.
Yes.
Sabina, 12 minutes passing, please. You shorten.
15 minutes. May I have my last 2 minutes and then I close?
Fine, fine.
Okay.
3 minutes, okay.
I'm so sorry, I prepared for the wrong length.
Important presentation, yeah.
Pakistan did a multidimensional vulnerability index in which it identified factors like overcrowding, intergenerational households, and unemployment as additional indicators of vulnerability. Afghanistan used micro simulations to simulate increases in food security, employment, and child school attendance. And national MPI went up from 51% to over 75% with those simulations. Bhutan issued a rapid remote socioeconomic survey in the tourism sector and did a vulnerability index on those workers, which I thought is interesting because it was very much focused on the most vulnerable sectors. And they found that 80% people working in those sectors had at least 3 core vulnerabilities. And then they analyzed those people. And in Bhutan, they are also using the 2017 population and housing census in order to identify groups who are vulnerable if there comes to be local transmission, and to plan disaster preparedness responses for different population subgroups, as well as to identify children without tablet, a smartphone, internet connections for schooling. Outside the region, governments are regularly using the MPIs as very much just-in-time tools for their COVID response, and often because they are updating the data a little bit more easily than it is possible to update in South Asia. So I can answer any other questions, but that's what I can do in 15 minutes. Thank you so much. And again, I look forward to our...
Thank you very much, Dr. Sabina. Very informative and very, I should say, revealing paper you presented. If you could have more time, you could present that anywhere. We got the message. So may I now go to our panelists, we call. Panelists, I have the first name, Dr. Srinivas Tata. Srinivas Tata, Director, Social Development Division, UNESCAP. Please, you know the timing, so I'm not stating, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you very much for cutting short the introductions, which are really in order to save time. I totally agree with that. I mean, the question that I have been asked to highlight is, as you know, that recently UNSCAP member states adopted a regional action plan for implementing social protection in Asia Pacific. It's a voluntary plan, but it's a plan that really provides a good framework for an assessment of social protection and how to move forward. In that context, I've been asked to give a small background to how valid this is for South Asia and how this action plan could be used by countries in South Asia in order to take forward the agenda of social protection. Now, with your permission, Mr. Moderator, noting the short time at my hand, I'm going to focus very briefly on why I think the situation of social protection, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, is slightly more problematic in South Asia as compared to the rest of the world and the Asia Pacific region. We know that the COVID pandemic really exposed, kind of highlighted to us how vulnerable vast pockets of our population in our sub-region are, simply because they do not have access to social protection. In Asia Pacific in general, the coverage of social protection is very low, with about 50% or little less than 50% of the population having access to any one scheme. But for South Asia, this is much lower, because this percentage is 1 in 4 have access to any one scheme. So this percentage in terms of coverage is much lower. In terms of investment in social protection against a global average of 11% of GDP and an Asia Pacific average of 7%, countries in South Asia invest less than 2.5% of their GDP in social protection. So I think from the perspective of coverage and investment, we know that we are kind of much behind the rest of the Asia Pacific region. And when this COVID-19 pandemic struck, it the anecdotal evidence that we have is that countries which had established social protection systems were better positioned to extend social protection quickly in order to cover the populations, the problems faced by their populations. And countries which did not have structured social protection systems obviously struggled, especially when there was a sudden decline of working hours and jobs due to the COVID containment measures. In a region, remember, South Asia has typically very high levels of informal work, and we know, and they are not covered by social protection. This is where extending any sorts of benefits to them has proved to be challenging. Although, if you had established unemployment benefits, an automatic response could be there to extend it or scale it up, but few countries really had this comprehensive coverage. But still, I think countries in the region have done well, whether it be India in terms of allocating extra funds for the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, Pakistan's SAS Emergency Cash Program, which paid off one-off cash transfers to almost 12 million families. In Nepal, you had the Public Infrastructure Work Scheme. Sri Lanka, you had the payment to daily wage and vulnerable workers. So every country in our region took steps. But still, what it showed to us was a lot of this. One, I think COVID, in a rather paradoxical way, COVID-19 has brought social protection to the forefront. And I hope that this, and once again, put the lack of social protection, highlighted it, and maybe created more advocacy in the country, in countries in our region, in governments of our region, that we need to move towards more comprehensive social protection schemes. There is also a much stronger realization that investment in social protection schemes should go beyond shock responsiveness. We just shouldn't be responding to shock, but there should be a longer-term strategy to create stronger and universal social protection schemes.
And Dr. Srinivasan, 5 minutes over.
Okay, I have the last in terms of the regional action plan to strengthen regional cooperation. This was adopted recently. We call upon countries to establish benchmarks on social protection coverage, to set up intermediate targets, and also to measure progress towards universal social protection. We have a list of measures to be taken at national level in terms of addressing legislation, design of social protection schemes, grievance systems, and shock responsive social protection. Above all, the action plan also provides an important regional platform to countries to consolidate their good practices, facilitate peer learning, and advance the social protection agenda. So, Mr. Moderator, to end, The action plan for South Asia can build on initiatives that were taken in the context of COVID and the lessons learned in response to the pandemic. And it can also help leverage the focus on social protection gained during the pandemic to build more inclusive and comprehensive social protection systems. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Srinivas. Now I turn to Mr. Noman Majid. He's Senior Employment Specialist, ILO, Decent Work Technical Support Team for South Asia, New Delhi. Please.
Yes, I would request the host to switch on my camera because I can't do it from here. The host stopped it so earlier on.
So
can you hear me? Yes.
It's an escape part,
Yes.
please.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I thought the time was about 7 to 10 minutes, but since it's 5, so I don't know. I think I'm not going to shorten what I'm saying for 7-8 minutes. And if you want to stop me in the middle, I'm happy to freeze up. Okay. Question. First things, well, what was asked of me was to actually say something about growth and employment in this context. The question is long, so I will not repeat the question, and I will just, it's about the broad contours of a growth stimulating decent work policy agenda for South Asia, especially in this context. Now, the first thing that I would say is that, you know, the whole issue about the growth strategy to achieve decent work or good employment is as relevant now as it was before. And I will say this, I will show how, I'll try and show how that is by looking at some of the typical responses that governments have given, and then proceed. Of course, I have to make the proviso that I'll be talking about South Asia in general, bearing in mind the big economies. And of course, I recognize that there's a lot of diversity across the different countries. And I don't want to go to the list of diversities because that will eat up into the time. First, typical responses. What do the governments, what have they done? The immediate mode has been cash transfers, social safety nets, credit facilities, perhaps sequenced. So it can be MSMEs first and big capital later. Price control measures. Then there's also recovery stage 2 plans, which are sort of, given the global slowdown, there's expectation that there'll be greater focus on infrastructure and construction-based revival. There's also a question of policy priorities. Given the quantum of a feasible stimulus, transfers of livelihood focus versus recovery focus. Some countries have got greater wherewithal to realize the plans, others less. It depends on fiscal space, financial health, debt dependencies, obligations, and so on. But it seems that whatever is done, and these are the things that we have been talking about yesterday and part of today, and we'll continue to, whatever is done for recovery in this region, it'll take time. And it'll take a much longer time. I want to emphasize that, much longer time than, say, East Asian economies or some other economies. This brings me to the growth point, which is everyone knows, but I think we need to underline it sort of like in red, that there is a serious growth collapse. And, you know, it's been the worst, as World Bank says, in 40 years. Maybe in some countries, you could say that it's post-independence. This is one of the biggest crises as far as growth is concerned. But what is also critical to remember is that growth was slowing down in most of our countries, I think except for Bangladesh, in most of our countries in South Asia prior to the crisis. So it's a question of whether you are going down and you dip further, or whether you were going up and then you dip and then you recover, right? So this is a major distinction that we need to make. 3 of the main South Asian economies were definitely slowing down before COVID hit: India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, amongst them. Bangladesh is the only country, I think, that I can give numbers, and there may be some differences with others because these are, everyone does their own calculations. But Bangladesh is the only one that actually sees increasing trend from the past. Okay, estimates for the future, before I get to the main point, is that the bank recognizes that the region is going to grow from 1.8 to 2.8% in 2020, and it's going to further plummet in 2021. Recoveries may start coming in 2022, but we have got a tough 2 years ahead, probably one of the toughest in our histories. Taking all this into account, we have negative growth expectations in the immediate future, which means that this is going to happen despite the best efforts that countries make to revive themselves, all the things that we've been talking about. So there's going to be a severe crisis. And I don't want to talk about, particular responses. As far as future is concerned, as I said, there's going to be a slowdown, negative growth probably, or hardly, sort of very minimal positive growth for the 2 or 3 years. And this is despite our efforts that a policy and project and other efforts we want to make in order to redress this. And it's also despite technical limitations, because it's very important to recognize that there's a serious data issue with respect to numbers, right? High frequency monthly numbers are misleading. Coverage of informal economy in national accounts is superficial and lagged. There's a base effects problem of interpretation. If you start from a low level, then it's misleading as far as growth is concerned. Now, one reason why, and this is very important, why poverty and inequality are so sensitive, and by poverty I mean the income poverty over here, are so sensitive to an income growth collapse in this region is, and this I want to emphasize, and so I say it like more slowly, is because employment structures have been very slow to change with growth, which means that there are very few inbuilt guarantees of protection, going to what my previous speaker was saying, right, in the employment structure when there is a collapse, right? The major implication of a growth collapse is that declines in per capita income will lead to massive increases in poverty, as millions who live just above the national poverty lines fall into.
Norman, sorry, yes. I have to intervene.
Well, I'll keep quiet, right? But this is, sorry, it's incomplete.
Maybe
but,
1 minute.
No, it won't do in 1 minute. I'll be fine. Yeah, thank you very much. Right.
Thank you very much. We heard from Social Development Division, UNESCAP. We heard from ILO technical team for South Asia, technical support team. Now we are focusing now to countries. Now I would request Dr. Sabnam Safraz, Member Social Sector Planning Commission, Pakistan. And may I pose a question to you to be specific? How do crises and shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic reinforce pre-existing inequalities, and which are the groups lacking access to capability enhancing services, thereby most vulnerable to poverty inequality traps? Please try to hint on the question I posed. Thank you. Dr. Sabnam. Dr. Sabnam, are you with us? I saw you.
Yeah, I forgot to unmute myself. Thank you so much. I would focus on the question. We have learned and observed how high levels of inequality have complicated economic incentives, tilted democracies in favor of powerful interests, all the while undercutting the idea that people are created equal. Also, the capitalism is not self-correcting towards greater equality, which is why governments have to and have played constructive roles in offsetting the snowballing tendencies of greater wealth. Yes, there are already income, education, health, and excess inequalities, which we all recognize. There have been spending disparities, with high-income countries having 10 times the critical health workforce and 60 times as much per capita expenditure on health. Yet people in low-income countries, they're spending 3 times as much out-of-pocket expenses as compared to them. Pakistan, being a developing country, has its share of inequalities. Being an agrarian economy, historically, more than 60% of our population is rural. The largest province by area is housed to only 5% of the population. This translates, if you can translate that into excess challenges, which are huge. Multidimensional poverty and food insecurity has hugely enhanced globally as well as nationally when COVID-19 struck. As policymakers, we need to understand how multiple inequalities intersect and reinforce each other. COVID-19 has thrust the world into the deepest global recession since World War II and broadest collapse in income since 1870. We are at the brink of looking at famines of historical proportions, with 100 million more people getting pushed into extreme poverty. Economic fallout is affecting all those working in the informal economy and low-wage markets, read mostly women. This means more distress on the already strained access to health, education, work opportunities, resulting in more inequalities. Migrants and mobile populations are further marginalized, and we are concerned, and they are hugely exceptionalized. The dense pockets of population getting focused, while those on periphery getting sidelines. The tail ends of this gradient have gotten even thinner, I feel. So I think I've given you my perspectives around it, and there are many things that we need to wake up to work together on in partnership, particularly with the region in addressing these.
So you ended, Dr. Shabnam?
I can highlight on some of the policy lessons in the context of Pakistan, if I have time. So throughout
one or two.
Okay.
Yeah, policy lessons, 1 or 2, 3, yeah. Please.
Throughout the response steered by the government of Pakistan, the SDG framework, it continued to serve as a pivotal reminder, enabling us to ensure that we addressed at least all these components, minimizing the chances to overlook pressing agendas. That has proven fruitful, and let me elaborate. I sit at the Planning Commission, which is the apex planning of the government of Pakistan. Our first priority was to immediately mobilize funds through repurposing from existing projects, and also while also mobilizing the external assistance earmark for response, which came our way through the bilaterals and multilaterals. COVID-19 being a public health disaster, first and foremost, our immediate focus was on strengthening SDG 3. Health systems, infrastructure, urgent procurements, makeshift deployments, student volunteer forces, mobile labs. We are now moving towards pandemic preparedness plans for the next step, supplemented by a comprehensive health manpower plan, which brings me to SDG 4, education. In addition to launching the tele-channels and shifting education to internet, mobile learning modalities were adopted to reach to off-grid children, scholarships and internet support to pockets of marginalized population, and now infrastructure strengthening and facility deployment in far-flung areas. All of this was supplemented by the state's efforts on SDG 1 and 2.
Okay, Dr. Shabnam Sarfraz, please. Yeah, we heard your policy lessons as you indicated. Thank you. Now, may I turn to Dr. Fahmida Khatun. She's Executive Director, a private think tank we call, Center for Policy Dialogue in Bangladesh. May I pose a question to you too? What are some of the critical interventions, policy actions needed to support progress towards advancing human well-being while generating synergies and mitigating trade-offs, if any, across various SDGs and their targets? Please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. It's really an honor to talk about the question you posed. I think you know the answer much better than me, but let me just try to respond within 5 minutes or so. The issue of advancing human well-being is at the core of sustainable development concept. So human well-being is not only about economic progress or increase in income. It is about the improvement of quality of life, and quality of life encompasses issues such as eradication of poverty and all types of deprivations. We heard about the multidimensionality of poverty in during the keynote presentation. Besides the issues such as access to opportunities, enhancement of capabilities, and above all, the issue of upholding the human rights aspect, these are also part of the human well-being. Besides, improvement of human well-being is also about protecting the natural environment where we live in, because the welfare of our present and also the future generation is dependent on the sustainability of the environment. Now, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has emerged as an unprecedented challenge to human development and well-being. We heard about this from the previous speakers. It threatens to push billions of people back into poverty and increase inequality. And therefore, the recovery efforts which are being now undertaken by various governments across the world from this pandemic, and also the long-term development plans, must work towards a host of issues which are critical to human well-being. These are, as I mentioned, the problems. These should be the elimination of poverty and hunger, reduction of inequalities in opportunities, ensuring access to quality healthcare, and reduction in terms of the exposure of the diseases, and also increase to quality education and other social services, and of course, reduction in gender inequality. And achievement of all these objectives, of course, are humongous tasks. However, we have seen that countries are now responding to the fallouts from the pandemic in many ways, in various ways. And this is also an opportune time to redesign our development efforts. Because what we have seen, if we are talking about now South Asian perspectives, in the South Asian countries, we have seen that countries have done quite well in terms of economic growth and also some social indicators. But what is common across the region is that the benefits of growth has not been distributed equally across various sections of.
That's fine, Dr. Fahmida. Dr.
Yes.
Fahmida. At this stage, I want to put you a specific question again. How can countries in South Asia accelerate structural economic transformation?
Okay, yes, this structure, the transformation, yes.
Pandemic.
As you know, that economic structure, all the countries have gone through a structural transformation from a predominantly agriculture economy to manufacturing sector, then to services sector. But what is now required, that we have seen that these sectors, in order to improve the productivity, the efficiency of these sectors, we need to invest more in this sector. Because agriculture is, particularly in case of Bangladesh, that most of the people, though the share of agriculture in GDP is declining, but more than 40%, almost 50% people are finding employment in this sector, which means that a lot of people are underemployed. On the other hand, if you look at the manufacturing sector also within South Asia, the employment generation has more or less stagnated. It's not creating additional employment. And the service sector, the scale of the services, that has to be increased. Some countries, for example, India has been able to take some of the benefits of the service sector through technology. So now coming to the issue of technology, I think COVID-19 pandemic has again provided us and created the realization that the future of work will be different.
before COVID-19, we are talking about the emergence of fourth industrial revolution, the use of technology in our day-to-day life. I think COVID has expedited that, and this will have to be adopted in all the sectors. When we're talking about transformation of our economy, one of the issues of transformation is to enhance productivity, and that productivity enhancement should be through technology. And while we talk about the technology, access to technology is a crucial issue. So if each and everyone is not, does not get the benefit of the technology, I think there will be again a digital divide. So while we are talking about build back better, we'll have to take care of the environment. At the same time, we'll have to take care of the inequality aspect so that it doesn't create new poor in terms of by creating deprivation to many facilities which will be on the table. One last point, I think in this region, since I'm talking about sustainability and also inclusiveness, particularly in view of the environment, I think a lot of investment is required in this area. We are seeing that during COVID period, many Western countries, many advanced countries, they are investing huge on the green technologies. So we also have to follow that path. However, resources are limited. We have to go for partnership. South-South cooperation could be one of the options. Thank you very much.
Sorry for guillotine. Dr. Uchita D. Joysa, Chairman, Global Sustainability Solutions, and Executive Director, Center for Environment Development, Sri Lanka. I have a question to you. I want to know specifically, what are the prospects and challenges for South Asian economies to pursue a green from the COVID-19 pandemic? How can a green and inclusive recovery create opportunity for boosting income, jobs, and growth?
Thank you, Dr. Alam. Let me very quickly get into the business given the time constraints. The way I see the question is about inclusive transformation for prosperity for all, in summary. Now, 5 years have passed in the SDGs since we made the commitment. Now, when we are discussing the aftermath of the pandemic, planning for that prosperity, we must also ask two other questions. Prior to the pandemic, what have we done as in transformative action to achieve the SDGs? And then are we taking transformative action during the pandemic itself? Now, those are the key questions that governments and their stakeholders must ask before going into the aftermath. Now, in this sense, in our region, have we been, in our planning to implementation, have been responsive to breakdown scenarios such as climate change that we are very vulnerable to? Secondly, do we take alternative scenarios based on ecosystem services? How positive are we on the circular economy? And then when it comes to policy regulatory scenarios, where is the modeling based on resource economics in this region? Now, those are critical questions if we are going to move forward looking at the new normal. Now, answering the question of challenges, I see three. First is resource governance in our region. We basically believe there's such a lot of fascination about centralized control instead of advancing the principle of subsidiarity, again, the urban to rural, national to subnational level kind of processes. Secondly is about the resource relationships. How do we facilitate resource relationships? There are multiple resource relationships, but then to control them. Thirdly is the resource regeneration. Now, this is an opportunity to understand that if we do not invest in the resource regeneration for the future, such pandemics are going to start hitting us and the breakdowns are going to happen more. Now, coming into the prospects or the solutions, see it again in three ways. One is reimagining domestic resource mobilization. That is a critically important point. We can't be stuck in old planning boxes. We need to reimagine, look at the cases that has happened and move forward. Secondly, reorganizing the resource flows. Now, we need to understand that the resource flows are multiple, and then to have create resource flows, facilitate them in a way that they flow through the people, for the nation, for the causes, so that we do not encourage breakdowns like we are having on earth today. And finally, it's on reinvesting in transformational pathways. We have a lot of talk about the SDGs in the country. We do pay lip service to transformation, though. Now, in that sense, if we are not investing in our national to regional to subnational to global in a way that the future generations are adhered to, are looked after, then we are trying to look at the situation, call it a new normal, and then start exploiting more for the future while keeping control now. Now, to summarize, I know I have limited time. Before you tell me that I have limited time, I will stick to the time and then come back. Finally, we have come up with this publication, which is called Localizing the Transformation in the New Normal, a domestic resource mobilization framework for sustainable development goals in Sri Lanka, formally launched yesterday. We are proposing the recalibration of 4 contexts: policy context, localizing context, financing context, and the transformation context, if the SDGs are to be implemented in a country. First, particularly Sri Lanka, we have done that. What we are saying is that the new normal brings us greater foresight, aptitude for bringing greater foresight, strategic foresight, and vertical versus and horizontal growth for prosperity must be a journey through an inclusive transformation, and it must leave no one behind. So I will leave it at that, and I will come back so that the moderator, you did not have to tell me I have to stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Now I turn to Ms. Pramila Acharya Rijal. She's President, South Asian Women Development Forum in Nepal. Please, in what ways has the pandemic intensified existing challenges for women's economic empowerment, particularly women entrepreneurs in South Asia? What would constitute priorities for South Asian countries to pursue gender-inclusive economic response or recovery? Please, Pramila. Dr. Ms. Pramila.
Thank you. Let me begin with some sobering findings of the Global Gender Gap Report 2020 of the World Economic Forum. Gender parity will not be attained for 99.5 years, and economic gender parity will take another 202 years to achieve. In other words, none of us will see gender parity in a lifetime, and nor likely will many of our children. So this is a very grim picture. And we do have some, existing challenges. And I just want to share some data, from the UN findings, just to compare the existing challenges and the challenges post-COVID-19. So the existing challenges says that globally up to 30% of income inequality is due to inequality within households. Women take most of the responsibility for caring for the family. They earn less, which is a known fact, save less, and hold much less secure jobs. And what is surprising is that there is no country where men spend the same amount of time on unpaid work as women. In fact, women's employment is 19% more at risk than men's. So these are the existing data. Now, what has happened post-COVID-19 situation is that the pandemic will push 47 million more women and girls below the poverty line, reversing decades of progress to eradicate extreme poverty. And this is coming again from the UN Women source. And while the poverty rate for women was expected to decrease by 2.7, unfortunately, between 2000 and 2021, projections are now showing an increase of 9.1 due to the pandemic and its effects. And this is according to the new data released by the United Nations Developing Program. So these are very grim pictures. And I would like to share an online survey done by my organization on the impact assessment on women entrepreneurs post-COVID-19. which was undertaken in 10 countries in South Asia, including China and Myanmar. What we saw was that there were very common challenges, among the women entrepreneurs in South Asia. One was business loss and economic instability, which we know it was due to the frequent lockdowns. And then again, there was this labor shortage, and also transportation and logistics, that hampered the business transactions of women entrepreneurs. And two major concerns were, the health concerns and mental health. This is a very shocking, finding, because in South Asia, after the post-COVID-19, what came out was that women were in deep mental stress. And there was a lot of social issues like violence against women and a lot of suicidal cases also. So these were the common findings from this online survey undertaken by us in 10 countries. But there were also some recommendations and inputs which women entrepreneurs proposed in this online survey. And the most major issues that they were concerned about is that how will the government bring about strong policies to address this challenge? So one was that tackling this inequality in income, healthcare, and social protection in short-term stimulus measures and also in long-term measures, and also adopting measures to help women in low-paid and informal jobs. This is a very big challenge because the daily wage earners and the informal economy is the large chunk of people involved in the informal economy is women, which is a known fact. And also providing adequate supportive measures to reduce shocks for women entrepreneurs and recovery efforts that invest in the female workforce tailored to each country's specific needs. That was something everybody said. Each country is different, so we have very specific needs, though there are some common challenges. And also supporting SMEs to ensure the economic COVID-19 recovery is gender responsive and inclusive. So these were some of the recommendations. But we also came up with some areas for future growth and resilience for women entrepreneurs. This is from the finding of an online survey. And a number of priorities for future programs and skills were suggested to revive business post-COVID-19. And leveraging digital marketing was one of the top priorities for the women entrepreneurs. This was very surprising because when it comes to digital technology, the findings say that women are behind, but now there's a demand. Now women feel that digital technology will help them. And diversification of business was something else that again came as a new finding in this online survey. And also managing operations in crisis and business plans because women were just not prepared, and planning for more than one income stream to ensure smooth business operations, and developing business resilience. That was again a very core area of concern, and planning for business diversification. Women felt that, diversification was very important to revive their business. And of course, financial management was another area of inputs that we got, and risk planning and building new technical skills for business. Thank you. I have shared my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pramila. So we have finished the panel discussions. Now we'll go for civil society participation. So each will get 2 minutes and not exceeding 3 minutes anyway. So try to finish by 2 minutes. Ms. Dulon Ganguly, Program Director, Azad Foundation, India. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Alam, and good afternoon to all distinguished guests here and my co-panelists. So yes, many points have been covered by my co-panelists, so I will not repeat that. But as we all know that there are, though the governments are putting effort to fulfill the SDG goals, but there are a lot of gaps which we all are experiencing in, when we say we the other CSOs are experiencing on ground. And to meet those gaps and to really fulfill the SDG goals, governments need to put a multi-dimensional inclusive mechanism in place. We know that COVID-19, which has started as a health hazard, a health crisis, now it is a human and economic crisis. And in our region, due to this non-equitable economic growth, there are a lot of job losses and the increased poverty. Under this situation, we advocate for, and when we say these job losses and increased poverty, since I don't have the time, I'm not going into deeper analysis, but the thing we all know, the declining of women's participation in workforce, and many people are working in unorganized sector under tremendous vulnerable conditions. And also we know that lack of social security systems, inequality in wages and in wages or incomes, and which really creating job losses and increasing poverty. Under this situation, we advocate that governments should come up with specific mechanism to ensure skill development and to make more investment in skill development and creation of job opportunities. We know in our region there are certain improvements, certain progress in 4.5 SDG, which is equitable education, equitable and quality education, but it needs to be linked with the job creation and skill development. And when we say skill development, I would like to emphasize on I would like to request governments to think in a non-traditional way and to expand the opportunities for across all marginalized communities. I mean, not to think.
Dulon, you need to stop, please.
One more point, Dr. Alam, as my previous panelist also said about digital divide, and we see in South Asia, 28% women are less likely to own mobiles than men. We really request government to invest and to reduce this gender gap. And social protection is another area to increase and to ensure livelihood generation and livelihood generation for all marginalized people and especially women. And when we say marginalized people, we would emphasize to see and to request to use the intersectionality lens to government, by all governments. Just two more points from my side. One is we request governments to launch a specific mechanism and program to engage men in unpaid care work to ensure that women can participate in more in workforce. We know it has always been a hurdle, that gender-based violence, but which is now a shadow pandemic, and governments, if really want women should participate in the workforce, then the government should have legal system, mental health counseling, support and shelter homes and support for survivors.
Please, Dulon Ganguly. Thank you.
Just 1 minute. The need of the award is a collaboration between government, industry, and CSOs, which is highly required at this time. Thank you so much. I conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dulon, and I feel sorry for so much intervention.
It's absolutely fine.
Now, may I request His Excellency Mr. Dilshad Akhatov, Ambassador of Uzbekistan to India. Please, maximum 3 minutes, please. Dilshad Akhatov, are you with us?
Alam Saab, I think he has left because he had to attend some other meeting, so he might have left, so we can proceed.
Okay, then I go to the next. Mr. Ahmed Sharfin, CEO, Society for Health Education, Maldives.
Thank you.
Speak for 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for giving us this opportunity for the CSO to present our case. I would like to focus on the issue of social protection, especially with regard to access to medical services, mental health, and violence at home and elsewhere during this time. Of course, the COVID crisis had slid all our countries back several years in terms of economy. And as a result, this is having a direct impact on our social services that have been rendered. Medical services, access to medical services, I think, is one of the challenges that all countries face, where we have to deal with it. In which case, it's therefore essential that that all our focus is given into a universal access to health services that are there. Us as an NGO working on the mental health sector, this again is an issue, I think, in the region that need to be addressed properly for us to have the goal 3 and other goals properly addressed in terms of our mental health. I think the COVID crisis has indicated the need for the attention to be given to this. Similarly, on the case of gender as well as on reproductive health, these access to these services were also limited a lot. So all this shows that there is a huge need for us to invest on the human capital and on protecting, especially the vulnerable. And this, in terms of achieving the SDGs, can only be achieved by the governments working very closely with the civil society, especially the community-based organizations, for us to deliver on this. I think we are here to collectively work on this. And at this point, we would also have to take into account the challenges that have been faced by children, both in not getting enough access to education during these closed times, but also the violence that they often have to face at home and elsewhere, had also seemed to have improved, and limitations in terms of access into these services. So I do see, while there are financial inputs that have been put in to support this, I think collectively it's important for us to work together to ensure that we reach to those who socially need these services. So yeah, that is my intervention at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed. And now I can open the floor for open question. And please, who are attending, you can raise question, queries, and any suggestion even, but it must be very brief, please. Anyone who are participating?
Alam Saab, may I intervene? For all the panelists, please also see in the chat box, there are certain comments which have come. If you would like to read them and answer, we would be grateful also in your intervention.
Then raise your hand that you are answering, but 43 participants are here. So from the floor, I mean, from the participant, if you would like to ask any question or if you have any concrete suggestion, you can put forward, you can participate.
Dr. Alam, may I just...
Please.
You know, there is a chat box question from Mahinder Rajaram, which is he is asking, with many hazard events in South Asia, what is the plan to address them? Why is climate change and disaster not part of the planning process? And my short answer to him would be that tomorrow there is a special event on disaster and climate resilience, and in particular incorporating it in the planning process in South Asia. So you are most welcome to participate in tomorrow's session. But for today, I think some of the panelists also wanted to have something more which they could not finish. And this is maybe probably an opportunity for them to
Add to.
make their
Yeah.
closing remarks if they have.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Or see chat box if anything is there for you.
Dr. Alam, can I respond?
Uchita, speaking.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and I also typed this, not being sure that there will be time, but I can see some questions. One of the greatest challenges that we are facing in strategic foresight, planning, and so on and so forth in the countries is that we really do not feel that this whole process still has gone to ecosystems driven economic modeling. I mean, the lessons learned must take us to greater understanding that we cannot be looking at linear modeling of multidimensional poverty in the growth economic model alone. That is a very dangerous approach, which will create greater calamities by just looking at tinkering around old little bushes. Now, the transformation is required from greater foresight. And it needs to be called within the carrying capacity, and to bring in all communities collectively through their resources and having lesser control and exploitation of resources. So prosperity must be inclusive, and planning for inclusive prosperity must be through transformational approaches. So that is what I wanted to drive. And the current approach, the challenge of the pandemic is humongous. No government is left out of that challenge. We do appreciate that. But then we need to move out of our comfort zones of planning and look into alternatives that has been touted for the last 30-40 years in these kind of forums and all the writings and scientific outcomes as well. So I just wanted to leave that.
Thank you very much. Anyone, any panelist, respected panelist, you want to contribute? But maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Can I just, just for 1 minute?
Fahmida, Dr. Fahmida, please.
Yeah, close. I think just taking clue from my previous speaker regarding the type of the nature of development, what we plan to do during the post-COVID recovery period. Of course, we'll have to take into account the environmental sustainability, at the heart of the development. But what I wanted to also emphasize during my presentation earlier is that investment will be huge to recover from the COVID-19. So, however, we are seeing that the resources from the multilateral sources, resources are not enough. So there is an emphasis on the domestic resource mobilization, and that's why the economic and regulatory reforms are required within these countries, which can increase the resource mobilization effort, because ultimately it is the domestic source which will be the key source of resources in order to recover from this pandemic, which is really unprecedented. The impact is going to last long. So that's why at the two parallel efforts, at the global level, we'll have to highlight our demands and needs for more and new sources of resources, and on the other hand, we will have to also put our all efforts to increase the domestic resource mobilization effort.
Thank you. And this session will have final comments from Dr. Nagesh Kumar. But before that, I put forward some of my comments, if you allow. So I thank you all for your very valuable, I should say, comments, suggestions. It's very relevant at this time while we are grappling with handling COVID fallout in South Asia. Last week, with the initiation of Pakistan Planning Commission, Planning Minister, the SARC had first meeting on how to how to go with reducing poverty during these trying times. So that was a very, I should say, desired initiative, and all 8 South Asian nations participated. That was very encouraging. So at this time, while UNESCAP arranged this session, and this is very much relevant at this time to develop our strategies, how to revitalize our economies in South Asia. First of all, I must thank our first paper presenter, Sabina Al-Khair, who presented the estimation methods, how we go with estimating multidimensional poverty using 10 indicators. And she very interestingly showed the country performance in South Asia in terms of multidimensional poverty. Though not all follow the same indicators, indicator measurement a bit has been different for Afghanistan and others also. But anyway, the heartening thing to listen is in the globe, poverty has been the highest in rate of poverty reduction has been highest in South Asia. So that was very heartening to learn. And about multidimensional poverty, as SDG says, we need to go with multidimensional poverty, emphasizing deprivations also, not only with income poverty. So you are launching crusade, I should say, to go with estimation of multidimensional poverty. Bangladesh, we estimated multidimensional poverty for children. That was our exercise, how it comes up with the figures. So we developed the methodology, and others in South Asia already adopted multidimensional poverty indicator. So that is very encouraging, and we need to gradually actually go to estimating multidimensional poverty. So Bangladesh, we are also trying step by step. And amongst our panelists, I mean, our Srinivas talked about sharing good practices, what we have, what we develop in each country. We have some good practices to share with others. That's a good idea. That's why this kind of seminar, workshop at the initiation of UNESCAP would be useful. Next time we may go with best practices that derived over the last couple of years in terms of SDG implementation. We can share with that maybe. And Srinivasan also talked about database. That's a big problem, particularly with SDG. SDGs, we have a long list of indicators, about 232 or 244 with repeated use. In Bangladesh, we have only 1/3 of data on the indicators of all those, maybe around 108 or 10. So this is the case with other nations in South Asia too. So we are trying to generate data for indicators in Bangladesh. Perhaps it will be more within next couple of months, 125, 30 for data. For indicators, 130 indicators we may have. So we are trying to have more access on data through data mining or data generation. Mr. Noman, you said growth slowed down in South Asia and except Bangladesh. That is the pre-COVID situation, but during the COVID situation, Bangladesh growth rate also slowed down in Bangladesh too. We are supposed to attain 8.2% growth rate if there would not have any COVID, but we attained only 5.2%. This is also projected, maybe below in the final estimation. Actually, growth also slowed down, but positive. That's the good thing, not negative anyway. And we expect no negative growth for Bangladesh. We are coming up in Bangladesh. Actually, economy has rebounded, I should say, in terms of increased export. Even export is higher than last year. Well, after this COVID also, we have more remittances, highest ever. Never we had so much before. We have highest reserve in bank. We had never before. So Bangladesh is coming back very rapidly. Hopefully, the next year, 1 year maximum, we'll be back on the original growth path, hopefully. And Shabnam from, if I can pronounce correctly, Shabnam or Shabnam, how to get rid of informality in job market? It's a big question. 81% of labor force is in informal sector in Bangladesh. It's a big number. So this need to be reduced, and for this, we need to invest for more in human resources, obviously, education, health, and infrastructure building. Otherwise, no way. And we need to invest more for public health and to face public health disasters. We face in a similar way all the Southern nation. And Bangladesh is also not that much actually hit by COVID. We are certainly, but not that much like India. There's a big, impact on India as we see from the media. And Dr. Fahmida raised the question of how to attain sustainability in terms of environmental management. Of course, no growth would be sustainable at the end of the day if we can't manage environmental issues or climate change adverse impact issues. So that's why we prepared a 100-year plan for Bangladesh. You know it, or others may know it. Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. We have a 100-year plan, forward-looking plan, to address only the climate change issues. So hopefully other nations also may follow this kind of techno-economic planning to address climate change issue. Uchita D. Joysa talked about resource regeneration, mobilization. Those are very much pertinent. Resource regeneration is possible if you only care environmental issues. Otherwise, once resources get degraded, you cannot take it back. So environmental issues must be cared for. This reinforces the concern of Dr. Fahmida. Pramila, gender gap parity, talked about pandemic intensified challenges, particularly for women, because still they're the most vulnerable segment of the population, like children, So, but Bangladesh also doing very well in terms of gender empowerment, 50th rank in South Asia, and others, others up 100. So we need to see the impact on women and children folk due to this poverty, due to this pandemic situation, due to job loss. In Bangladesh, 67% job loss was there in the informal sector. It's a big number, you see. And it's a big challenge already the attendant also because of in South Asia, every country, I think, poverty rate has increased during poverty. Bangladesh, we had, as we had under the poverty line, that has risen to 29.4% during the last quarter of the last fiscal year. I mean, last from March to June. So it's a big jump. So it happened in every country of South Asia, I think. So that put big challenge. Work together, we need to think of how we can best handle this situation through South Asian cooperation, through regional cooperation. Dulan Ganguly, still, not only she, all, I think we need to emphasize more on social security programs to face immediate resurgence of poverty. So the providing supports to poorer section. So, and she also said how to reduce unpaid care work. Well, unpaid is a very complex issue. You can reduce unpaid homework, unpaid labor at the home or caregiver by making your economy more market-oriented, based on market transactions. So that is only when women will have more jobs, certainly they will contribute in the economic growth, and gender gap will also be reduced, and no question of one day there will be no question of unpaid care work, and they are not cared for. They work 8 hours or more, or 10 hours, 12 hours in the house. So that's a big and complex issue. So I fully agree with Mr. Ahmed. All in all, we have to invest more on human capital. And we must have environment strategy in planning. So obviously, I fully agree. I think I should not persist more. I have talked a few points that that hooked up in my mind. So I now hand over to Nagesh Kumar, and I thank him very much for giving me a chance to moderate this important session with so many people, particularly the keynote presenter. So thank you very much, Dr. Nagesh Kumar. May I hand over to you for final comment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alam, for steering this very important and challenging session, and for your excellent time management, and concluding with some key points coming out of the discussion. So it was a very rich discussion. I'm sure everyone enjoyed being part of it. Now we are turning to another very important discussion in the Roundtable 2 on harnessing global, regional, and sub-regional partnerships and means of implementation for accelerating SDG achievement in South Asia, covering finance, technology, data, and statistics. And to steer this conversation, we have Dr. Abid Suleri, an old friend of mine, and many of the participants know him very well as the Executive Director of Sustainable Development Policy Institute, which also organizes in December every year the Sustainable Development Conference. And this year, I think it is 15th, 16th of December, Abid, if I remember the dates correctly. Yes, and this is a very important regional event focusing on sustainable development. And Abid also has another hat, many hats, but another hat, which is a member of Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. So he is a very distinguished economist of the sub-region and beyond, and he has agreed to chair and moderate this session. So over to you, Abid, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nagesh, colleagues from South Asia and beyond. It's a real treat virtually meeting all of you. We know that SDG Forum and other UNSCAP meetings, when they used to take place in person, were one of the events that we used not only to exchange our academic and intellectual discussion, but also to meet and greet old friends from the region and to reassure solidarity, regional solidarity. So I'm glad that this opportunity is being provided. Now, looking at the next session and how it is planned, we'll be discussing another very important topic and point in this whole discussion of SDGs, and that is about means of implementation, and that is about forging and nurturing partnership, and how can we take care of financing requirement, how can we take care of data requirement, and how the different technological aspect of it, those can be addressed, and especially the statistics. Now, I think while we have been discussing and we keep on discussing that COVID-19 that hit the progress of countries in particular, in general, and South Asia in particular, towards SDG quite negatively. But I also see some sort of silver lining and ray of hope in this whole challenging situation. And my optimism is based on the fact that this pandemic has actually compelled the governments to bring social sector development back on their radar. So governments, they cannot keep on ignoring the health expenditure, water and sanitation, food security, social protection, decent employment, and all of these things. Otherwise, in a region, especially if I look at South Asia, which was quite mad in chasing this GDP growth number, which is one of the important facts. Macroeconomic indicators, keeping your fiscal deficit down and making your current account a surplus, etc. So for the first time, we can see that even if there is some fiscal deficit, or if the GDP numbers, if they are going down, as long as the governments, they are spending on health, they're spending on online connectivity, they're spending on food security, or other ways to tackle COVID-19, perhaps it would contribute towards achievement of SDG. But that is at a national level. Now, if we link it with the sub-regional and regional level, and if we try to see that what sort of mechanisms are in place for means of implementation, that we will learn from a very distinguished panel that has joined us today. I'll keep introducing them as I invite them to express share their thoughts in 3 to 5 minutes. We have representation from each country, and then of course representation from UNSCAP as well. And as I said, it's about financing requirement, it's about data, and it's about technology. And on COVID, especially when in the amidst COVID, when everything is dependent on 3G, 4G, and technology, I think its importance becomes even more important. I was just wondering, I was sitting with the CEO of the largest telco provider in Pakistan, and we were discussing that had this COVID hit us 10 years ago, what sort of crippling situation we could have found ourselves when 3G and 4G was not very prevalent in Pakistan and perhaps in other countries. So just imagine if it had hit us in 2010 or in 2005. So what sort of crisis we have been facing. Without ado, I'll go to Dr. Hamza Ali Malik. Dr. Hamza Ali Malik is representing UNSCAP Secretariat here. We Pakistanis, we know him as one of the eminent economists who was an important pillar in State Bank of Pakistan, and his academic and intellectual contributions are extremely important for us. We still keep on reading them and cherish. So Hamza, while you are here, I would ask you about the main challenge of financing for SDG in South Asia, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19. And again, the macro indicator, and I would love to have positive numbers on them. At the cost of those numbers, how to finance them, and what does UNSCAP prescribe for building effective financing mechanism for building back better? And I would also add building back greener and cleaner and better.
Thank you very much, Abid, for a very generous introduction. Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. This is Hamza from Bangkok. In the interest of time, it's only 3 to 5 minutes. I've tried to limit within 5 minutes in the first round. I'll try and make 3 main points around what Abid has highlighted, what the key challenges faced by Asia Pacific, and in particular, focusing on South Asia and what can be done, what are SCAP's recommendations. My first point is around SDG progress and the financing gaps, even before COVID. I think it's important. I wish we had the slides. I can probably show you one slide, not more, for about 10 seconds. But the first thing is we all are familiar, I'm assuming, with SCAP methodology that they have been putting out, that we have been putting out on SDG Gateway Asia Pacific, where we show progress of the region on different sustainable development goals. If we look for South Asia, what stands out is that they made very limited progress on goals such as poverty, inequalities, and climate and sustainability. And what is more worrisome, actually, there is regression on goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production and strong institutions. It's important to sort of take a stock or take a look at where the progress is lacking and where there is regression, because that helps us zeroing in on our policies in those areas particularly, right? So for the present purpose, if we see there are gaps in poverty, or more work is needed in the poverty area or climate sustainability area, for instance, or inequality, that means the lead from the state has to come forward more than the contribution of the private sector, for instance. And that will require, among many other areas, some resources. Coming to the resources part, and this is one slide, if I can have the liberty of showing that, only one slide. Can you see it, or should I not bother? Can you see the slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so this is the main slide. It took me efforts. This is building on our work that we did in 2019 around estimating costs, investment requirements for meeting sustainable development goals across the region. The average for the region was around 5% of GDP, with huge variations across countries. This left-hand panel, the orange bars that you see, show the figures for South Asian countries or South and Southwest Asian countries. And you can see for some of them, the numbers are enormous, like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and India. The additional annual investment requirements to meet all sustainable development goals by 2030 are more than 25%, right? That's an enormous task. Even for Pakistan, that is around 17%, more than 17%. For some, it's slightly less. So compare this to the right-hand panel that I've shown. This is essentially the status of financial flows in South Asian countries, where the region stands against the additional requirements. And this is based on very generous assumptions. There are two bars, blue and green. Blue represents if we assume the 2% growth takes place for the rest of the 10 years that remain 2030 agenda. And that 2% is the actual average for the region, which is actually about 1.9%, but rounded off around 2%. This, and for some countries, this is high, some countries is low. On average, Asia Pacific between 2015 and 19 have generated additional flows of around 2%. Even if I assume a very optimistic scenario of 5%, we assume that, let's say, countries step up efforts and they channel more investments towards sustainable development goals. This is what we get, the green bars. And you can see they're nowhere near the additional investment requirements that are needed, right? So for example, Bangladesh, if they need about 25, 26% of additional requirements, in an optimistic scenario, the numbers are not going beyond 3%. And same is the case for several countries. So my point here is very simple. There is an enormous, actually, I couldn't overemphasize it, enormous gap between, how do I unshare that, sorry. Enormous gap between how much countries can need to invest in this area, in meeting sustainable development goals. So COVID has come on top of this condition, which was there, this situation, and it has simply exacerbated the challenges big time. So countries face huge, enormous financing gaps, and COVID has made the challenges all the more difficult. That's my first substantial point. The second point is around policy space has actually become limited. And in the interest of time, I won't go in the data this time, just to keep things simple. For instance, we all know the deficits have gone up. Countries have accumulated more debt for the right reasons because they responded very aggressively to the COVID pandemic. On average, Asia Pacific has come up with the policy support packages of around 1.8 trillion or close to 7% of GDP. For South Asia, that figure is about 3.3% with huge variations within countries where some countries have put out more resources. It depends on country resources. That's not my point over here. The point I'm highlighting is, as a consequence of initial response to deal with COVID, the fiscal space or overall policy space has become even more limited. So on the one hand, you see huge financial requirements that were there, and I showed you some numbers. And on the other hand, COVID has actually made the policy space, in particular fiscal space, all the more limited. And that is exacerbating the challenges. So Abid, this is a fundamental challenge we are facing. We don't have enough fiscal space to try and meet the financing requirements that are needed to fulfill our ambitions of sustainable development agenda. My last point, and I'm going to be specific on this one, surrounds around what can be done about it. what is ASCAP thinking and have been doing and what we recommend. There's a range of policies, and I'll be very brief, and I'll be happy to discuss further as the discussion progresses further in this in this session. First of all, countries, I think, need to have a genuine look at their budgets. I'm talking about enhancing fiscal space. There's a lot of room as we look at the data and we go into details. There's a lot of room in countries to try and realign the existing resources. So reprioritization of public spending is number one. They need to get rid of untargeted subsidies. Huge defense spending in some countries in South Asia is a huge problem that need to be channeled now towards sustainable development goals because it's an emergency now and the gaps are huge. We need to talk about widening tax bases. It's been talked about it. South Asia stands out always for the wrong reasons. Their tax GDP ratio tends to be one of the lowest in the world. That needs to be corrected. Various mechanisms are there. There's a lot more talk about carbon pricing, for instance, now carbon taxes, the potential of carbon pricing schemes, not only to generate revenues, but also to try and address the environment goals. Number three, improving tax administration. You need the capacity of the tax authorities to try and go after those things. Again, we have done some research and we have some ideas how to go about doing that. Increasing progressivity of the tax system itself. South Asia and Asia in general relies a lot more on indirect taxes compared to direct taxes. That needs to be corrected. They are quick, easy wins in some of them, not all of them, but some of them are certainly quick, easy means or quick means in 1 or 2 years, you can actually make the introductions. Administration and other issues may require more time. Relaxing fiscal rules is something the country should do immediately. A lot of countries have already done. Philippines, Indonesia have already relaxed fiscal rules to deal with the pandemic shows. They can generate income from the assets of the countries. India is a good example of that, where they're using the railway property in terms of generating resources. Considering innovative financial instruments, like SDG bonds, for instance, is another option. Improving debt management, and we are putting out policy briefs, what are the gaps and how paying attention to those areas can actually generate additional resources. Reducing and postponing some public debt obligations, for example, participating in the global DSSI.
Hamza, if I can ask you to please start rounding up, it's already
I literally 20 seconds left. The second last point, actually, I was done. And the last example is reducing illicit financial flows, either through dealing with trade misinvoicing or various tax-related leakages. BEPS is one of them, right? So there are about 10 options, and you can put numbers behind that to see how much additional resources can be generated to meet the huge, enormous gap that exists out there. For separate conversation, we can also talk about how to engage private sector more effectively, but let's leave it for later discussion. Thank you, Abed, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Hamza, for coming up with the very practical suggestions. If you can unshare your screen, please.
That's what I was trying.
And in the meantime, I'll invite Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, who is Director General of RIS. Sachin, of course, colleagues, they know of him as one of the proponent of regional cooperation, have been working on innovative ways of South-South cooperation. And Sachin, my question to you is in the same context. It is about South-South cooperation in the times of COVID. We know that traditionally we have been talking of North-South cooperation a lot for closing gaps in the means of implementation, especially when we talk of SDGs, even if we don't talk in the context of South Asia, but generally Southern Global South has been dependent on Global North. But what sort of opportunities you see for South-South cooperation so that one can bounce back from this pandemic that can benefit South Asia, and especially learning from each other's COVID experiences? What sort of the lockdown or smart lockdown or no lockdown are the testing techniques, are the social protection, poverty alleviation, health? So what is it that is working and in different countries, and can we learn from each other? Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Abid Bhai. At the outset, let me thank Dr. Nagesh Kumar and the UNSCAP for getting all of us together and giving us this opportunity of re-exploring the idea of regional cooperation, the global context, and of course, the coping up with challenges. As we heard in the previous session, it's a very difficult recovery phase
we have entered in, and Mazid very rightly pointed out in terms of how difficult it would be in terms of getting the finance arranged, and as Dr. Malik gave a couple of options that are there. I think on the table, first and foremost is also to realize that the multidimensional poverty-related presentation that was made in the previous session brought out this facet of almost 530 million people who are grappling with this question, almost 29% population. But the silver lining is that almost 19 million people have come out of absolute poverty in Bangladesh, and 265 million people have come out of absolute poverty in India. So this has given us the heft that is required for us to move forward and re-explore the idea of South-South cooperation. I think 4 areas are of great significance, and I would emphasize them. First and foremost is the financial sector cooperation, making it easier to trade and encourage banking and finance connect. And in this context, the SARC-led finance cooperation, which at this point is being done by the Reserve Bank of India, I think deserves our attention. They are strengthening it, and regional cooperation in the financial sector, particularly in the banking, for transfer of resources for small and medium enterprises to reduce the transaction costs. I think that's the window that has come up. The regional central banks are also cooperating among themselves. So that's a facet, Abid Bhai, it has to be placed at the center as we move forward for regional integration. Trade alone can help in a major way, but if it is backed by finance and banking institutional architecture, that would be excellent. The second point is about manufacturing and value chains. As in the previous session, it was identified by Dr. Famida as one of the important points. And I think it is extremely important that we do regional integration. And in this, Abid Bhai, more can be learned from Africa, which has gone for continental-wide a free trade agreement in Africa, and the countries are participating. I think South Asia has to learn it and has to do it. That's my second point. Third is to connect the wider global context, as in the background note UNSCAP has emphasized, in terms of the global opportunities there that are coming. India's presidency in 2023 of the G20 gives us a unique opportunity in terms of how the global financial initiatives, the global value chain related initiatives, and other dimensions that G20 has been addressing, particularly in terms of the sovereign debt and the pandemic, particularly health sector related issues that are being addressed, I think are extremely important. And South Asia as a connect would be important. The emergency fund that has come up, and that's my fourth and last point, in terms of how the SARC emergency fund that has come up is going to go forward in terms of what is required. Since this session is also covering on data and statistics, and in the wonderful initiative by Dr. Nagesh of SANS, I think all of us own it. All the think tanks of the South Asia have the ownership. I think it's important to discuss, though today we don't have much time, but to discuss the indicators that have to come under Tier 2 and Tier 3. And these negotiations from 2021 would again be led and coordinated by the UN. And I think it's very important for the regional institutions to collate their energies and move forward in terms of how we can do that. And last point would be, as vaccine is on the horizon, Bangladesh has already entered in advance agreement with the Serum Institute in India. I think the cold chain related infrastructure, other measures that are required in terms of distribution of vaccine, more regional cooperation in this would be most welcoming. I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin, especially for pointing out and highlighting the importance of this SARC emergency fund. The next learned speaker on my list is Dr. Renee Van Berkel. Dr. Renee Van Berkel is a Unido representative and head of Unido regional office in India, which is coordinating the rest of South Asia. And we all know Unido from its innovative and sustainable industrialization initiatives. In the context of this pandemic and the bouncing back from it, we were wondering to know the role that Unido can play to facilitate sustainable industrialization, to face the challenge of fourth industrial revolution, which I say that the COVID, it has actually accelerated our adaptation to digital transformation, which otherwise perhaps the region could have taken many longer. Now, within this, do you see that there are some global or regional cooperation strategies that can actually then help the region towards this adaptation of the fourth industrial revolution in a sustainable manner, and what role Unido can play in it?
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'm audible. Thank you very much to invite Unido to this panel, and I'm really pleased to contribute. I think I would like to respond. You put the bar quite high with the questions. I'd like to respond in that we see a lot of change because of the COVID pandemic, and the COVID has highlighted some weakness in the pre-COVID situation, which are now being addressed and brought to the fore. So we see not a return to building back, but we see a return to a new normal. And I think it's still difficult to see exactly how that would look like, but I think as an immediate one, we will see a refocus on health and humanitarian values and investments in the health sector. I will not talk about that because I think that there will be changes in global manufacturing and value change. And that will be driven, as we see from Unido, by three drivers. One will be, I would like to say, is probably the resilience, because we saw that basically some factories shut down in one country and have impact on other countries. So that's the resilience argument. The other one is the green one, the transition to, I would then call that the circular economy. And the third one on the digitization, which is Industry 4.0. So let me start with resilience. So I think that companies have done now more stress tests on the supply chain, so that we see a return to redundancy, to have larger buffers, to have local supplies, leading to kind of nearshoring and diversification of supply hubs. This will accelerate, but it's not the start of the relocation of manufacturing jobs from China, as China had already become basically too expensive for much of manufacturing, but there is an opportunity for South Asia, across the board for South Asia. I think in the longer term, we might see a transition to what I would maybe nickname as global value change 2.0, because we see that the response capability from value change has been better where manufacturing and innovation have been more closely linked together, and there has been a dispersion of manufacturing and innovation in different parts of the world, and those companies which have gone too far on that have lost some of the ability to adapt. So we might see a change from the kind of export promotion zones or export processing zones, to more integrated manufacturing and innovation hubs that are more vibrant, innovative, and agile to respond and adapt. So then I come to my second point, where circular, or call it the environment. So circular means still different things to different people, but we take it as a guiding idea for structural green reform towards the resource shift. So using renewable materials, renewable energy, resource efficiency. So using all natural resources in an efficient way to make more money, but also be more environmentally sound. And then also the circularity, the closing of the materials loop. We think that even though some are saying that the environment will take a backseat, we don't believe that. It will not take a backseat. I would actually make another point, that inefficiencies in water, in energy, which were already not economic in the past, have become even more non-economic. So in times of recovery, we cannot afford to leave any cost-saving opportunities let aside. So we need to triple our focus on energy efficiency, water efficiency, and related issues. And we should also look at if we have recovery packages and investments to make those environmentally sound. So let's invest in addressing water, sanitation, waste issues as a public investment. And I think also that we can see that those who were skeptic on climate change have got a reality test. So if you see what the pandemic has done to the global economy, and then we project on what's the risks of climate change, they will be much larger. So people have become more susceptible that business as usual really does not exist. So then there's a problem which you also refer to on assessing the necessary environmental technologies. And in that sense, I think Unido takes a twofold approach. So first of all, there is a need to invest in the scouting and the partnership and development of adapting international best practices and best environmental technologies, and create then the necessary conditions for them to come to South Asia in terms of the intellectual property safeguards, contractual security, and so on. And Unido is doing some work. If I just talk out of India, we work on pulp and paper industry, so to get some technologies from Scandinavia, from China into South Asia. But I think the second part of it is that we also should recognize that there is a vibrant technology and innovation community in South Asia that we could capitalize upon. And that's the work that Unido is doing on clean tech innovation and entrepreneurship. And there we see really big challenges coming forward, or big companies coming forward with which are doing transforming markets for energy efficient ceiling fans, to just mention a few things, or to introduce phase change materials so you save 20% in your chest freezer. So these opportunities are there. We need to focus on innovation culture. That brings me automatically to the third part, which is on the digitization and Industry 4.0, fourth industrial revolution. I would agree with the previous speaker that we have seen, or with your introduction as well, that we have seen a transition, a digital transformation during the pandemic. But I think we have to make a difference between the e-commerce, which has really skyrocketed, and the digitization in a broader sense of the economy and society through the fourth industrial revolution. And we've seen some good examples of that. So we have seen drone delivery, we have seen drones being used for monitoring, we have seen 3D printing for ventilator parts and so on, and we have seen the use of data analytics to actually generate some of the vaccines. So Unido worked quite a lot on that. We did our flagship industrial development report on the industrialization in the digital age, so on Industry 4.0. We referred then to the advanced digital production technologies, which are basically connect then the hardware, which is robotic arms, with software, and also with the connectivity. And these three elements are each important. And what is really important, if we look at the countries which are moving forward, we see some examples, some leaders also in India and South Asia, but they are operating in relative isolation. So there's digital islands happening, of islands of progress against value chains which are using more traditional technologies. So we see the need to invest in production capabilities. So it's not only the digital maturity that counts, but also operational technology maturity, where businesses in South Asia, small and medium-sized enterprises, still have things to do. We saw three main policy areas coming out of this, and that's focus on the framework conditions. So that is basically modernization of the industrial technology and innovation policies, and also digital policies. But it's not only digital. Let's put that clear. Then looking at the demand creation and adoption by improving awareness. So that's government programs, also government looking at procurement, what government schemes can do to bring in Industry 4.0 technologies. Last but not least, there needs to be an investment in the strengthening of capabilities, particularly human resources and research capabilities. And there we emphasize it's not so much the individual capabilities of firms or innovators, but it's the capability of the partners in the ecosystem to work together to find solutions that can be dovetailed or added to existing second generation or third generation industrial technologies to add some of the digitalizations. I would agree with earlier speakers and the overall trends. Of course, the challenges are lying ahead, but there's also optimism looking forward. So there's a unique opportunity to harness the momentum for change that in part has been brought about by the pandemic. The pandemic has focused on some of the core issues which can be addressed. And with the refocusing and redoubling efforts, there is prospects for addressing these issues of resilience, circularity, and digitalization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee, for highlighting the important dimensions and aspects of sustainable industrialization. Now I'll go to Afghanistan, and we have been joined by Umar Joyosab from Beruni Institute. And Umar, question that I had in mind for you, that is about this shrinking foreign direct investment inflows amidst this pandemic. And one was wondering that the vulnerable South Asian economies, how they can establish, what are the prospects to establish regional and sub-regional coordination and cooperation mechanism for promoting trade and investment flows toward SDG-related sectors.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soleri. And first, my apologies for a last-minute change in the agenda because my colleague Nazir Kabiri, the Executive Director at the Burin Institute, was supposed to attend, and he could not make it for today's session. So, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk. So I think even before the COVID-19 pandemic, and as it was always discussed in the SDG forums that were held prior to the pandemic last year, was that the domestic and external financing for the SDGs were already falling short of expectations prior to the COVID-19. Some estimates, for example, those by the OECD, has shown that external private finance inflows to developing countries would fall by as much as $700 billion this year compared to the 2019 levels because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we've seen, that pressures on domestic revenue mobilization and also the growing challenges for accessing the ODA, I think we are now more convinced that there's no single source of financing that could close the financing gap for the SDGs in the post-COVID-19 era. I would like to talk briefly about the official development assistance before I mention a few points on the private capital and private investment. So the reason that I'd like to mention ODA is that in Afghanistan and also the case with many other low-income countries, foreign aid represents the largest source of development financing. Here in Afghanistan, 40% aid is as large as 40% of our GDP, and it finances about 75% of public spending in the country, and this is huge. And then the analysis that we have done together with the World Bank shows that even for the next 10 or 15 years, we will still continue to rely on foreign aid, even under very optimistic scenarios for economic growth, private investment, and exploring mining development in Afghanistan. So we will still continue to rely on ODA. But I think COVID has been a great opportunity to revisit the structures and the effectiveness principles of the international aid regime. But I think, unfortunately, the experience that we had in Afghanistan, especially with the latest donor conference that we had for Afghanistan in November, it was held virtually, but it was actually hosted in Geneva, is that I think changing the donor behavior and the international aid regime, even in the post-COVID-19, is going to be actually very difficult. But with that said, on the ODA, I think there is also much more room to actually keep exploring or tap on the potential of the private capital and private investment. Because I think COVID-19 has offered an opportunity to push our governments to improve the policy framework for private investment and private capital. Although it might not be a common attitude in all other South Asian countries, but I think in Afghanistan and in some other countries in South Asia as well, governments were previously reluctant into accelerating the business climate reforms. And what we have seen is that once the governments have seen that the financing scope is shrinking for them in the post-COVID-19, I think there's a better realization or a better appreciation of the potential that the private sector could bring in. I think to improve the policy environment for private capital, I am just briefly mentioning 4 points here. First, I think in South Asia, we do
Kumar, we have to wrap up because it's only 5 to 7 minutes per participant.
Yes.
I'll come to you in second round. So if you can give me the crux of those 4 points, please.
Yes, exactly. So I think enhancing capital account policy.
It shows a commitment, how committed he is to SDGs.
Can I request Saad to please mute your mic?
So I think there is an urgency to enhance capital account policies, basically to ease capital inflow restrictions in some of these countries, but that would require, I think, coordination at an international and regional level. Second, I think there's also further room to enhance trade and regional trade and cooperation as was previously mentioned, and I think the potential is huge. Some of the analysis have shown that if we could reduce the trade cost in South Asia by just 10%, Afghanistan could benefit from an additional 4 percentage point increase in GDP, and 4 percentage point increase in GDP per year. That's a substantial boost to achievements of the SDGs by 2030. Third, I think to mitigate the disruptions in the global value chains in developing countries and especially in the South Asia, we need to enhance the investment policies so that they would provide additional incentives, especially to maintain foreign investment in our countries in South Asia. And fourth, I think we do need to, especially in Afghanistan and in a few other countries in South Asia, we do need to further tap on the potential of the public-private partnerships. In some countries, especially in Afghanistan, we do need to work much more on improving the legal framework for the PPPs. And I think using PPP arrangements in the health and infrastructure would be catalytic in the post-COVID-19 recovery phase. And just as a conclusion, I think going ahead, all countries in South Asia are facing fiscal pressures and growing unemployment. Private sector is offering biggest potential. And I think there will be, and as I said, I think there will be better appreciation for using private investment and private capital to mobilize resources for investment in SDGs going forward. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Umar, for highlighting the importance of private sector investment and public-private partnerships. And I was just thinking if we can collate the comments from Dr. Berkel and your comments and try to see that how this public-private partnership and private investment can actually help in sustainable industrialization. That may be one way of going forward. My next speaker, again, a very dear friend, Dr. Salim Rehan, who is Executive Director of SANEM, Bangladesh. SANEM is, as you know, a network of economic modeling. Salim and his team, they have contributed a lot towards creating awareness on economic modeling. And Salim, my question to you, taking a clue from Umar, we know that ODA and trade, both they are getting negatively affected in the amid COVID-19. So what would it mean for South Asian LDCs? And given the current prospect of LDC, how can they overcome the current challenge, sustain their momentum towards graduation and align their recovery priorities with achieving sustainable development goals? Again, 5 to 7 minutes to you, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Avid Bhai. And I also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Nagesh Kumar and his team at the UNESCOP for inviting me to this very extremely important event. Abhidvar, you are very much right that the COVID situation has put additional pressure on the LDCs in South Asia, especially when some of them are in the graduation phase, and this has put additional challenges. So that brings, my first point. Actually, I want to relate the first point that given the current COVID scenario, I also think that achieving the long-term development targets, especially those under the SDGs, what we are talking about, these have become very, very challenging for not only for the LDCs, but mostly all South Asian countries. And we have already heard that the decade-long achievements in poverty reduction in these countries are under threat. And not only poverty, but also in other areas where actually we saw the achievements, these are also under threat. And at the same time, we're also seeing inequalities on the rise. So I think that there is a need to rethink the approaches to attaining the SDGs, given the new challenges. So the way actually the kind of pre-COVID, this kind of discussion of what we had, and the kind of approaches we discussed, you remember, in many of the forums and also the kind of works we have done. I think we need to rethink those kind of approaches. And also I think there is a need for renewed global discussion on the development paradigms, because the post-COVID-19 world is not going to be the same as the pre-COVID-19. And we even don't know when is going to be the post-COVID-19 world. So, as an LDC, Bangladesh is definitely, I would say that under serious pressure, as well as this COVID-19 situation, the poverty rate has gone up quite significantly. Some of the recent estimates are showing, as well as employment loss, and especially, and also in other social areas, especially the loss in education. I think that's also common in other South Asian countries too. Students, they are not being able to attend the schools. So many of the, as I said, many of these SDG indicators are under serious threat. I thought that under this situation, it is extremely important what Dr. Nagesh Kumar is seriously pursuing that agenda, that the need for regional integration, and I think it has become more important than ever. And we know that, we all know that we have been talking about this, the initiatives for regional integration in South Asia for various reasons have not been successful. However, as we are seeing that under this situation, we need to rethink and we need to rejuvenate the kind of process of regional integration. The kind of forums what have been created by new forums created by UNSCAP, I think this will be extremely important, and we need to actually make the best use of it. I know Hamza very rightly talked about the financing issue. And this financing issue is also, I think it has become more and more important for the LDCs in South Asia. And when we talk about financing SDGs, I think it has become more challenging now, and getting the countries back on the track to achieve SDGs. And it is required, it is associated with how fast the economic recovery can take place in these countries. And as we all know that while we talk about the economic recovery, and for the South Asian countries, this is largely dependent on the recovery of the global economy because of the links with the global economy, especially with the trade, as we talked about, even the ODA, and also the investment which is coming out from outside. But I want to emphasize the point that, and which is a kind of, we all probably have been talking for years, that the South Asian countries need to get their domestic fronts right to confront the post-COVID-19 challenges. I think we must not forget that there are many areas where these countries need to undertake reforms in trade policy, in investment policy, in industrial policy, in many social policies. So I think these things need to be corrected. I just want to highlight one particular point in that. Most of the South Asian countries, the governments, they announced unprecedented large volumes of stimulus packages to support the affected economic sectors. But the success of the stimulus packages depends, in my view, on three things: whether there is a sufficient financing of the stimulus packages, sufficient, not only sufficient, but sustainable financing, given the fact that many of the South Asian countries, they have low tax GDP ratio, and they also have the kind of way that Hamza, he has shown that actually, I was glad that actually we also did the similar exercise in Bangladesh, tried to estimate the additional cost of SDGs, attaining SDGs. So we found that it ranges between 10 to 25%. So actually, it matches very much with what UNSCAP came up with that estimates. So I think that financing is extremely important. But I also think that two other issues, which are also extremely important for the economic recovery, and also especially of the stimulus package, what we're talking about, the management of the stimulus package, which involves a lot of political economy issues, and the monitoring of the stimulus packages. And we all know that so far the experience show that actually, while I was looking at the experience in Bangladesh, because SANEM is actually conducting periodic surveys at the farm level to understand what is happening with the stimulus package, how many of them are actually receiving, what are the challenges they are facing. And when I also look at the similar experience in other South Asian countries, there are common stories which are actually appearing. There are serious management issues, especially not the benefit of stimulus package are being received by the firms. It's not kind of uniform. Large firms with probably more connections, they are getting the most of the benefit, and SMEs are seriously lagging behind. And we have to understand that if SMEs they can't get the required recovery, we will not get back to the on the track to achieve the SDGs, because SMEs they are heavily linked to employment generation, poverty alleviation, inequality reduction. I think these things need to be taken care of very seriously. My final point is that it's about the data and statistics. We all know that in a usual year, in the kind of normal year, we were quite happy with the kind of frequency of data what the countries were producing. We all also admit that as Professor Samsul Alam, who is the member of Planning Commission, he also mentioned about the lack of data, especially with respect to some of the indicators of SDGs. But I think the COVID-19 situation has actually shown us that the need for more high frequency data, especially when you talk about the poverty data, we have to probably wait for years to understand what is happening on the poverty, what is happening on the employment. But I think there is a need to have a common understanding. There is a need to build the capacity of the statistics office, as well as the policymakers. They come to an agreement that some of the indicators we need higher frequency data so that policymaking process become more informative, more informed. Thank you, and over to you, Abid Bhai.
Thank you, Salim. And in your 4 points regarding this stimulus package, I'll link your point with the data availability, and it is about targeting of, who would be given stimulus packages, and SMEs and many of the small farmers that you are talking about. Because of informal nature of South Asian economy, many of them, they're not part of formal or documented economy, and that's why they are losing out on this stimulus packages. The story is same, I think, across South Asia. But on poverty data, I think Pakistan's Benazir Income Support Programs database, where we provided 12,000 rupees to 15 million households in the first phase, and now in the second phase again, this 12,000 rupees per household is being provided apart from the regular Benazir Income Support Program payments. I think that sort of success stories, those are available that we can learn from each other. And now I'll come to Dr. Poshraj Pandey, Chairman SOTI, South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment. Again, an old friend and a proponent of regional integration. Dr. Pandey, my question to you was more in relation to this promoting regional transport energy connectivity as a key enabler for a coordinated regional approach to SDG achievement. So the particular question is that how can South Asian countries, in your opinion, they can harness regional initiatives and framework to create enabling environment for boosting investment, for accelerating clean energy transition and trade transport connectivity?
Thank you, Dr. Avid. Your question is related to wide canvas of trade, investment, connectivity, energy, and of course, I'm in COVID. I think I'll not be able to do justice to all these issues in 5 to 7 minutes. Okay, let me join other colleagues to thank Dr. Nagesh for organizing this event and also connecting South Asian think tank. Coming to the point, from economic perspective, the COVID pandemic is supply, demand, and policy shocks, which has resulted in contraction in the economy, decline in international trade, and a reduction in investment flows. And to address these shocks, economic nationalism outright protectionism, industrial sovereignty, or deglobalization cannot be and should not be the policy option, should not be the solution. Instead, deepening regional cooperation in trade and investment and building regional value chain could help recovery, post-COVID recovery that is robust, inclusive, and sustainable. And moreover, these trade and foreign investment are the most important means of implementation for the SDGs. And thus, regional issues of these two, investment and trade, they deserve, regional cooperation in South Asia. So the question is, is there any prospects on deepening intra-regional trade and investment in South Asia? Well, if you look at the report produced by the World Bank, a glass half full, and also UN publications, written and researched by our friend Dr. Nagesh, Unlocking the Potential of Regional Economic Cooperation. I know other research studies. They estimate South Asian countries have been utilizing only 1/3 of their potential intra-regional trade, meaning 2/3 is underutilized. So the question is, what could be the instrument and channel for utilizing the full potential? Okay, first, we should avoid both import and export restrictive measures, which we have witnessed during the onslaught of pandemic. And we need to ensure availability of and access to health supplies and food items in the region. So then if you have that kind of restriction, such restriction not only disrupt our supply chain, but it also create market uncertainties and also create incentive for producer not to invest, in that particular sector. That is, it creates some sort of disincentive, for the investor. And the second, what we need to do is we need to address key regulatory barriers and reduce trade facilitation gap, which are impeding intra-regional trade by simplification, harmonization, and automation of the process, as well as of the documents. And we also need to strengthen intra and inter-agency coordination and collaboration. That is the second point. My third point is we need to strengthen and expand connectivity by investing in trade infrastructure, both soft and hard infrastructure. And such investment not only reduced trade cost and minimize supply chain disruption, but it also enables a more sustainable and resilient post-COVID recovery. For this, we need to conclude our very old SHARC motor vehicle agreement, BIMSTEC motor vehicle agreement, SHARC railway service agreement, also SHARC regional air agreement, and operationalization of BBIN motor vehicle agreement. And if we can conclude, those agreement would be instrument in transforming transport corridors into economic corridors. And my fourth point is liberalization of trade in service and financial cooperation and coordination in international payment. That is another issue. And in fact, the COVID pandemic has reinforced the need for regional cooperation in travel services, in tourism services, in health services, in e-commerce, and also in ICT and computer-based services. However, again, for this to materialize, we need to conclude the SATI, South Asia Trade and Service Agreement. My fifth point is, your question was related to the energy sector, and also we need to speed up energy cooperation in energy sectors. And here the difference in energy mix among South Asian countries, difference in hydropower generation capabilities among South Asian countries, and a regional variation in generation and consumption of power among South Asian countries. I mean, that provides very strong justification for regional cooperation in energy sectors. But how can we cooperate in energy sector? By providing cross-border power trade, by cooperating in cross-border transmission system, by creating a regional energy market through harmonization of legal and regulatory framework, as well as cooperation in development of power system database. My sixth point, and particularly with regard to the investment cooperation.
And it's your last point as well, Bush.
Okay. My last point is enhancing private sector participation in regional agenda and de-risking private investment. It could be through blended finance or maybe through guarantee scheme. And this, in this private sector participation in the regional agenda could be a game changer for regional integration. And again, and also, game changer for achievement of sustainable development goals. And the private sector can contribute through creative and innovative solution to solving sustainable development challenge. They can align their business models with sustainable development goals. And they can also support, government efforts, among others, in green growth, in disaster risk reduction, in climate change mitigations, and other, social sector activities. So here, my final, point is regional cooperations could be a complement to our national effort to address the challenge of pandemic and to address the challenge of implementation of sustainable development or Sdgs. And also, it would be an instrument to revive post-pandemic economy and build future resilience. Thank you. Thank you very much. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Posh, for very elaborately highlighting a roadmap for regional collaboration and how it can actually help in building back the recovery from COVID. And that actually helps me when I come to Dr. Dushni Veerapoon, Executive Director of Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. Dushni, Posh educated us a lot about this regional framework for cooperation. If I also add some sort of regional roadmap for SDGs based on this principle, so how can such framework and implementation on such a framework can ensure sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 crisis?
Thank you, Abid. Yes, I was listening to all the points that have been made. And on this issue of a South Asian roadmap, I think there's already a roadmap for the Asia and Pacific region that the UNSCAP has put out, and that touches on some of the areas that were highlighted previously, that is on data and statistics, on technology, finance, policy coherence, and international and regional partnerships. Now, if we were to draw from that and look at a roadmap for South Asia, I think the same sort of areas for cooperation in social development, in disaster risk management, etc., come up. And I think these have been discussed and debated at length, so I will not elaborate on that. Related to the partnerships that have been promoted is the fact that at national level, countries have progressed on their SDGs. Most have tailored them to their national context. They have, to some extent, resolved the data gaps and updated their national development plans and formed coordination mechanisms to report and monitor progress. So it is, in some sense, what next? And I think it comes at a point when we are all in this critical juncture dealing with COVID-19, and just listening to Posh now and some observations that were made earlier, it struck me that, you know, when countries in South Asia are looking at COVID-19 and beyond, they will not be looking at it in the same way that we did previously. Even in terms of, I think the point that you made in your introduction, that one positive silver lining is that more investments will go into health, education, etc. Now, when we look at what's happening here, yes, certainly more investments went in to social sectors in 2020, but in the next 2-3 years, we see that easing off, and the emphasis is really on kickstarting growth, and countries will see public investment in infrastructure as the quickest way of getting there, and front load public spending into infrastructure and less into social sectors as the immediate health crisis recedes. So, and similarly to what Posh was saying about need for trade integration, more openness to trade, more openness to investment, what we are seeing is in fact a reversal of that. Sri Lanka, for instance, we have sort of put up barriers to imports for various reasons, primarily because we have to save whatever foreign exchange we have. So I think the conversation needs to change about what is this roadmap that we can push for the South Asian region, learning from what happened before COVID and what we're likely to see in the post-COVID period. So to me, 4 things. One is that we have to have some concrete, something that is doable and something that will generate interest. One I see is as a sort of a regional monitoring mechanism that can be put in place, perhaps through a set of regional indicators that South Asian countries commonly agreed to, perhaps reprioritized after the COVID-19 crisis. Second is some degree of capacity building that support that the region can generate. UNESCAP is playing an important role there, but I think there is also country level capacity and peer learning that we can obtain from within the South Asian region. Third, and related to the above, is to perhaps also to adopt an integrated approach to reporting on some of these priority areas that we identify, so that it has some policy coherence and ensure that these are highlighted in a way that will gain the attention of policymakers. And fourth, connected to that, is that if we have that kind of integrated reporting and an integrated policy approach, it will also make communications on the importance of SDGs and the 2030 agenda much more easier and much more effective to help the region to collectively influence the agenda setting and ensure that South Asia's priorities are listened to and addressed to. So I'm going to stop there given the time constraints.
Thank you, Dishni, for providing very pragmatic 4 practical ways forward, especially for this regional reporting, regional monitoring, and capacity building, and reprioritizing what the region can achieve after COVID. But for all of this reporting and monitoring, we require statistics and we require data. And that brings me to Ms. Ahishta Shahuda, who is the Chief Statistician of National Bureau of Statistics, Maldives. Mr. Shahuda, the question to you was about availability of data, the role that statistics can play, especially the data gaps. Because if I look at it, perhaps we have 3 sets of data. One, the data which is directly available to us. Second, that we can derive through proxy indicators, but we don't have uniform units for it. And third, that we neither capture nor we have any proxy indicators for it, that simply doesn't exist. So how we can think of bridging this data gap if we have to achieve SDGs amidst COVID? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abid, and thank you for this opportunity. Actually,
in the countries of South Asia, all the statistical officers, agencies are facing similar issues on the need for data. It was highlighted yesterday as well. And now we are, it's important that we look at the data also in a more integrated manner. Up to now, like countries have been more focusing on the economic data, social data, and then environmental data and statistics has actually not been given enough attention. But with the SDGs, we have found that most of the data gaps that exist as in this area of environment, climate change, production and consumption. So many of these areas still at the international level, even the indicators and methods of calculation are still being worked out. But where we have already established systems and methodologies, still we have these data gaps. And with this COVID situation, countries actually, statistical agencies have stepped up, I would say, because the previous modes of data collection, face-to-face surveys and things, we had to stop. So, but the statistical officers, we have been discussing today as well in the CF management seminar, and then country experiences were shared that most of the countries have turned to new data collection mechanism like phone surveys, web-based data collection, and also trying to explore new data sources like big data as alternative data sources, and to try and fill these data gaps. And also the importance of data like to look at the gender statistics, like we know that COVID-19 has been gendered impact with it has a huge toll on women, and the inequalities and the poverties. We are forecasting that it is going to worsen because of this COVID. But to look at this, we need to have more focused data disaggregation, which is still a challenge. So by disability, migratory status, income, all these things need to be looked at. And for that, I think we need to have a whole of society approach and whole of the, now at the statistics community, we are talking about the data ecosystem. So in addition to the national statistical agencies in the countries, like we are looking towards the private sector agencies, civil society organizations, and working together to use whatever data we have to try and improve the standards and see how these data gaps can be filled. So the new, these data gaps, it has identified that new skills are needed. So capacity constraints are there, both in terms of identifying the data needs and also catering for those, better data visualization. And also the use of data, I would say at the policy level still is a huge issue even in the South Asia. So we need to have this culture of using data and also investing. We need to invest in the data ecosystem, invest in the national statistical agencies. And in the case of SDGs, we have specific goals that are focused on this as well. So in the SDG 17, for example, we are focusing on establishing and strengthening capacities of the statistical officers so that they can have timely, high quality, reliable, disaggregated data that is with localized SDG indicators and also at a local level. So all these things, I think.
Mr. Uda, if you don't mind me asking, how frequently do you interact with your counterparts in SAARC countries with the heads of other statistical organizations? So is there any formal mechanism where you can talk to each other and discuss?
Yeah, in the SAARC, we had actually a SAARC heads of statistical agencies meeting on a regular basis. But after this COVID, we have actually not had a meeting. So this, I think it's important that we activate this SAARC stats body so that we can have more collaboration, more data sharing and experience expertise, because we know that the countries, some of the countries are much way ahead and some countries are like at a much lower level of development. So all these things, having these type of networking and like systems in place will help. Now we work mostly with OIC countries, CEAP, and also ESCAP is working with the national statistical officers of the region. But it's a very important that even in this Goal 17, we are talking about the national statistics planning. And so having a national statistics plan that is actually geared to the prioritized indicators that require the data for the policy level, how to fill these data gaps. So a fully funded statistical plan, I think, is important. And now countries need to invest in this new technology, even in the data collection, data management, and explore these new data sources to fill these data gaps. I think even with the COVID, we have seen that the weak administrative system, even like the civil registration systems, these things need to be improved. We need to have high quality economic statistics, data on employment. So like there are a lot of gaps, but it needs time and it needs collaboration and capacity as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Nagesh, maybe I take away from her comments. I know that 2 weeks ago there was this meeting of SAARC heads of planning commissions, Niti Aayog and planning commission. So there was this formal meeting. Maybe UNESCAP can take a lead and try to bring the heads of statistical bodies in any such webinar. So maybe sort of an informal, formal meeting where we can have some understanding of data requirement and capacity building requirement amidst COVID.
Very good suggestion. We will take it on board.
Thank you. And that takes me to my second last panelist of today. That is Ms. Mamta Saikia. Mamta Saikia, she is representing Bharti Foundation, the philanthropy arm of Bharti Enterprises. For last 20 years, Bharti Foundation is doing excellent work in promoting education among the girl children in rural areas of India. And Bharti, you heard a lot about this private sector contribution, private sector partnership from our different panelists. So can you provide some insight how private sector can facilitate accelerating this SDG under the present challenge of COVID? Your mic is mute, Mamta ji.
Thank you, Dr. Abid, for the opportunity. And there were such learned speakers before me. I'm very aware of the fact that I am a penultimate speaker. So I would try and answer your question quickly. Today, you've already given the brief of our organization. So today I'm speaking, I'm sharing my insights from two contexts, Dr. Abid. One is our exposure of working in the villages, rural India. And second, as an observer and a participant in corporate social responsibility space in India, and the role that I'm observing private sector has been playing in supporting government's program in reaching SDGs. All speakers have spoken about it. Today, I think the world is divided into pre-COVID and post-COVID kind of an era. I would touch on both of them. There was, I was listening to somebody and a speaker said, if you had a time machine and you could go back and tell yourself pre-COVID how to get ready for COVID, what are the things you would do? And although this question challenges me quite a lot, there are no correct answers, it frustrates me, but I also believe that there was a lot of structures and a lot of programs that we had put in place pre-COVID that helped us come up with some of the solutions and processes that we're seeing today, humanity deal with everything that COVID has thrown towards us. So similarly in corporate space as well, I'm part of many, if I may use the term CSR, and I'm hoping everybody would understand, I've been part of many CSR spaces. Very quickly, context, the CSR Act has been really a transformational intervention in India. In the last few years, what it has done is, today there was some data published by Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and there are on an average 10,000 to 12,000 companies which are undertaking structured CSR projects, right? We have something like 3,000 to 4,000 US million dollars coming into, as part of CSR funding. These are published data that can be gotten from the websites. In CSR space, education, health, development takes a large part implemented. 30%, over 30% of the funds, corporates are implementing themselves. They're implementing projects on the ground. And 10% of the funds are through corporate foundations like Bharti Foundation. They've set up a corporate foundation or Section 8 company to implement this. So this is in the terms of data. But as an observer, what I have observed, how the CSR space have evolved in our country is, there are a lot of companies which are, let's say not the big ones, but the medium size and smaller ones. They have initiated CSR projects as per our act in the last few years. We're also noticing that there is a propensity to establish CSR projects near your area of operation. So we're seeing that both from the perspective of stakeholder engagement as well as ease of monitoring it, ease of managing it. But we've also experienced some very excellent partnerships between NGOs and corporates. So when you bring these two worlds together, they have to understand they have to establish certain working processes. So we're seeing now some very corporates which have been doing work in the area of CSR even before the act. They have created models of transformational projects in the country, very large scale. So this space, thanks to, I think, somewhere the CSR Act intervention, which has been made in the country, has created very good programs and structures.
I have a specific question, and that is, with this COVID, as we know that even the profitability of private sector is also shrinking. So do you see that COVID has impacted negatively on what different enterprises they could have allocated for their CSR? Of course, if the economy is in lockdown and if they are not making any profit, they won't be able to allocate any money for CSR. And what sort of then plan B do you have in mind?
So Dr. Suleri, I guess the data, and my previous speaker talked about it, till the time data is not available, one would not know exactly how the CSR spends are being, are they shrinking or are companies actually coming forward? Because I know that there was a call given by our Honorable Prime Minister and a lot of corporates responded to that in addition to, so, being in CSR space, how did I experience? I experienced the response like response would be for any, disaster. So the immediate response in the CSR space and all the CSR professionals was to make sure that food and other commodities and medical supplies like masks, etc., are being made available. There were messages being shared that this hospital in this particular town, that hospital in this particular village, and I could see corporate CSR professionals coming together and making sure that was being done. Then they moved towards more larger programs supporting the government, and coming from education sector, and I'll come towards the intervention that I wanted to make today. As educationists, what are we worried about? Our children are sitting at home. Across the world, children are sitting at home. All the progress that we have made with learning attainment, learning levels, getting girls into schools, our worry is that there would be, the learning levels may be lost, right? Would we get all the girls back into schools or not, are some of the worries that we're facing. What we've seen in the country, and I'm sure it has happened across the world, what we've seen in India is that corporate sector literally came alive. There were so many online apps to make education easy for children. I know of many corporates that started looking at how do we reach devices to children who do not have devices. So the corporate sector is coming together in education sector as well. And my sense is, if there is a lot of conversation and dialogue from people like you and people who've gathered here today, with some of the leading corporate houses, they would come up with, and they're already coming up with, a lot of innovative solutions. I think Mr. Pandey also talked about it, that if you involve the corporate world, there will be innovative solutions. More than finances, their expertise, their technical expertise would add tremendous value to the world as we would have to imagine, in the coming months and coming year. And as an educationist, I do believe that digital education would be a part of everybody's life now in education sector, and corporate world can play a very critical role over here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think you have put yourself on mute, Dr.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mamtaji. And that brings me to the final speaker on the panel, and that is Ms. Ashta Adnan, our civil society representatives. So Ms. Adnan, if I can also, you heard all of the speakers, and based on your understanding, we would like to know that whether as a representative of civil society, you feel that we are going in the right direction, or would you like to do and guide us about some mid-course correction for SDG achievement in the region?
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, I have been listening to all the speakers, and we see the focus is a lot about partnerships for data and technology. So my focus, I also have some few areas to add to this. One of the key things that we need to focus is on moving to the collection of new ways of data, let's say private sector and community generated data. So as we have seen right from the beginning, governments have been trying to generate data based on the service levels, and that is actually within the government, but we need to focus on to the other areas as well. And also, like when we look at the regional level of data, we are not very sure that we have people have access to the data that is collected even at the national level and also in the regional level. So what we believe is let's go for common data standards, identify it, and also let's open the data. The data sharing maybe platforms or mechanisms we can have in place, and let's focus on building a visualization and data stories where journalists and communities and CSOs can actually utilize this data. So they can even contribute and have access to this. And another point that I would like to highlight is like regional partnerships to promote access and development of technology, and whereby partnerships to share the resources under mutual beneficial agreements. And also we can see when everybody talked about the pandemic, we see that there was a digital transformations. But when we are trying to go back to the new normal, what would happen to these transformations? Like governments and regional support or partnerships we require for sustaining and facilitating these innovative approaches as we go along. And let's not forget, internet is the key here. Still, we can see that a lot of places, internet is a necessity for everyone, but we need to work to create more dialogues, more partnerships in order to address the regulatory issues, resource sharing, and investments for affordable internet, because even if we have the technology in place, still vulnerable communities, remote areas, they would not be able to get the benefit of the technology unless internet is available. So, and another one key area is like CSOs like us, we usually look for partners for financing for projects. And then we are only accessible to the local, let's say in Maldivian context, we say that we are only limited to our region or the country. But if we could have a way or could get more awareness on like what are the global or regional financial partners for achieving the goals, that could be helpful. So let's
thank you very much, Ms. Aista, especially for highlighting this digital inequality that prevails in the region, and that is actually hampering this access to many of the services which are now being provided online. My apologies to Maruf Barkat, I couldn't take your name first, but I realized that you will be the last speaker for today. Maruf Barkat is representing a civil society organization. So in the interest of time, if I could request you for your 2-3 minutes intervention. Thank for your patience and thank for listening to all of us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sulari. I don't want to take much time. I do agree with the last speaker, Aisha Adnan, and also the other speakers. They focused on many important issues. I just want to focus on very important issue that if we talk about the cooperation, whether it is finance or data or statistics or whatever it is, we really need to focus on a balance that in a country level, we have the government who is actually the guardian of the development initiatives or achieving the SDGs, whatever we say. Then we also have the private sector who are really leading the financial issues, the trades and development. And this is also necessary for development of the country. But we must remember they are more focusing on the profit. Of course, they have that the investment and they are focusing on the profit. It is not, there is nothing wrong about it. But we need to a balanced third sector in a country level, which is actually the civil society. And they are actually, I mean, kind of represent the people's interest to be specific. And they are really pushing forward to complement in achieving the SDGs. Because you know that if we talk about the SDG achievement, we must talk about the complementarity. And here comes the necessity of the CSOs. And actually, what we feel that I was really connecting when Mr. Selim Raihan was talking about the development of the SMEs, because particularly in the due to the pandemic situation, the SMEs are really struggling, and they are very important part of the country's economic progress. And so here is the point that do we really know that what are the challenges of the SMEs? Do we really have the data, enough data and statistics about the reality of the ground level? And if we really want to know that, we need to make space for the civil society organizations who can ensure the ownership of the data, ownership of the statistics, and the planning and the participation of the poor people. And the last point I want to say that we talk about the poverty reduction, but we hardly talk about the poor people. As if sometimes we think that poverty reduction and poor people are separate. They are not, because we just need to focus on the poor people and their challenges and their obstacles that they are stuck. So thank you very much again, Dr. Sulari, and also even SCAP for giving us the opportunity to talk in this big forum. And we hope that, I mean, our voice, I mean, who are representing the poor people, our voice will be heard and to the policymakers, so that we can, I mean, we really can meaningfully and effectively complement each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maruf Saab, especially for bringing our attention to SDG 1 and SDG 2. Of course, when we're talking of achieving SDGs within South Asia, goal 1 and 2, they are an integral part of it, but thanks for highlighting it. I'm sorry, despite my unwanted rude behavior towards speakers, we are still much above time, but I could see some questions, and one specific question is for Hamza Malik. So Hamza, if you can quickly respond to that question, and then I'll leave it to the judgment of other distinguished panelists if they would like to pick any question over there or not, and then we can conclude. So over to you, Hamza.
Sure, Abid. Let me take 30 seconds to less than a minute to respond. I think the question is by Shriram Gupta around the role of public sector and the balance between public and private partnerships. I think the more important issue to understand is where I was leaving the point, fiscal support must continue going forward for several years. Austerity is not an option. Once you start from this lens, then all other aspects essentially are supportive or have a supporting role. So whether it's public banks, private banks, they are going to play a supportive role. They have to under the lead of the, you call fiscal authority or the state. Now that's not a green light to unnecessary extreme buildup of debt and borrowing and things like that. That's just a principal narrative that needs to be put in place that austerity for several years to come should not be an option, and whatever it takes should be there to support member states, including from the public sector banks. That's what the question was essentially, I think, asking. But how do you do that? So you cannot just rely on banks. You have to develop the financial sector. One specific example, if the government is going to issue bonds, for instance, to meet its increasing deficits, who's going to buy those bonds? So if you only rely on banks or public banks or private banks, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be probably crowding out issue aspect of that. So financial sector has to be developed much more, so other elements can actually participate in buying government bonds to support the efforts. I mean, I can elaborate in details, but let me stop over here. One last point is, while we are talking about giving more fiscal space or more spending coming from the fiscal side, I think it's important, and several speakers mentioned that one way or the other, that the emphasis, the focus has to be on people and planet, not just reviving economic growth only. It's not going to cut it. We had a missed opportunity in 2008 to try and address some of the long overdue vulnerabilities and challenges like lack of investment in health system and social protection systems. We didn't do that. We focused only on reviving growth, and that's we saw we didn't go far. And now we are faced with COVID, and we are again seeing the challenges you encounter when you don't invest in those kind of aspects, right? So when we are giving space, talking about fiscal space, it's important to understand that fiscal space should be used to put priorities, to put people and planet at the center of all the spendings. And there are various mechanisms to do that. I indicated carbon pricing is one. I indicated reprioritization of spending and channeling them towards social protection, for instance, and so on and so forth. Thank you, Abid.
Thank you, Hamza, and especially for reinforcing the point that I made in the beginning, that perhaps this is the time when we shouldn't get bothered about GDP numbers and fiscal deficit and current account deficit, as long as we are investing in human development and social sector development. Any other last minute intervention from the fellow panelists who are there? So, Dr. Berkel, would you like to add anything? Salim, Pandeyji, Dushni? No. So perhaps I would not like to take much of time in summarizing it. If I have to give one-line summary of this panel, I would say that whatever we have been talking about regional cooperation, regional integration, and trying to find the solutions collectively for the problems that are confronting us in a collective manner for last many decades, for at least last 2 decades. All of those things, those have become even more relevant today when we are talking of bouncing back from COVID, after COVID period, and still trying to achieve SDGs. We need to perhaps rebundle and repack our narrative When we used to talk about reviving of SARC mechanism, or when we used to talk of intra-regional trade or intra-regional cooperation, perhaps now we have to add a qualifier that would help us bouncing back and create more resilience in the times of COVID, and everything that we said, it becomes more relevant. I'll hand over the mic to Nagesh for any last words. And thank you very much for this very learned and very educative, interactive session. Over to you, Nagesh.
Thank you very much, Abid, for conducting this session in a very, very elegant manner and leaving us with a very interesting, very nice, crisp thought, which is basically summing up the whole discussion. The relevance of regional economic cooperation in the new era of post-COVID world. And I think this is actually the mandate of ASCAP. All of us are very much geared to support and foster regional cooperation at broader and sub-regional levels. And, and it has come out from all different interventions in this session and before, that we need to work together much more in the new circumstances. So thank you very much indeed for managing this very important roundtable and with many, many very eminent speakers. Thank you everyone who participated in this discussion. And with that, we are going into the concluding or wrap-up session with our friends from Maldives that are hosting this forum this year. And basically, finally, I will end with by thanking everyone. So, do we have our friend Mr. Mohammad Imad from Ministry of National Planning, Maldives?
All right, thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. I thank the organizers and am pleased for co-hosting this auspicious event. And I congratulate the organizers for making this possible. And even at these very difficult times, we all need to work together to achieve our development targets. The COVID-19 pandemic has been hard on all of us. We have all been affected and are in this together. As we have seen from the sessions yesterday and today, social sector related SDGs, such as poverty and hunger, were SDG goals that impacted this region the most. Despite the progress on some SDGs, it would be not possible for us to achieve the goals by 2030 in the region with business as usual. To recover from the current situation and as well as achieve the SDGs, we need to have greater transformational changes and accelerators for SDG targets, which are not progressing as much. Data strengthening is also vital in order for us to monitor the progress on the SDGs and identify the areas that we would need to intervene for accelerating those areas. Also, it would be pivotal to understand the current situation better and make evidence-based decisions. The pandemic plunged people into poverty overnight and is deepening pre-existing inequalities and disparities. The existing vulnerable and marginalized have been affected the most and are more at risk, and we now also have the new poor and the new vulnerable groups emerging. We have seen efficient social protection mechanisms mitigate this, but there is still a lot more to do. We have witnessed how technology has had its positive effects on our trade, work, get an education, and also how we can support each other and our loved ones. However, we can't deny the digital divide is a reality and needs to be addressed swiftly. We need to ensure that the needs of the most vulnerable are addressed and better engaged in policy dialogue and needs to be ensured. Young people and women have been hit harder. We need to work towards a labor force with skills to function in the 21st century. As the region with the highest rate of need, not in education, employment, or training, amongst the Asia and Pacific, prioritizing and maximizing youth productivity is crucial. The employment crisis in the region, which the pandemic worsened, needs to be addressed with large-scale targeted responses, including comprehensive labor market policies and public employment programs, providing the space and opportunity to tech startups, young entrepreneurs that can build amazing apps and systems. Innovation and technology will be at the heart of the job creation, manufacturing, and guaranteeing food security and ensuring universal health care. Mechanisms that could contribute to a productive cycle of economic growth, investment, and social justice in the region needs to be formulated. Advanced technology-based solutions and investments in building capacities and investments for SDG implementation is much needed. Wide data gaps remain across all the goals, and insufficient data is a serious constraint faced by all South Asian countries. We must be able to transform existing data and information to actionable insights and policy outcomes that improve people's lives and that holds others accountable for doing so. Partnerships can harness ongoing initiatives in the technology community to accelerate the actualization of development goals. Partnerships and other forms of collaboration between diverse actors in public and private and civil society sectors are essential for achieving SDGs. Importance of building SDG-focused partnerships to drive financing and innovation to help tackle the complex development goal. Data availability needs to be increased and data needs to be properly used and reused to derive timely interventions. We have seen the financial requirements needed to achieve the 2020 agenda for the region prior to the pandemic. Tech pandemic has further shrunk the fiscal space. So the pandemic has further shrunk the fiscal space and widened the financial gap. This calls for urgent realization of financial commitments. The main challenge for us today is to implement a more integrated approach to sustainable development that encompasses the various means of implementation and new governance frameworks for enabling and managing systematic information. By doing so, we can exploit synergies between goals to achieve multiple SDGs by organizing implementation around SDG interventions that generate significant co-benefits. Urgent need for transformation to achieve SDG and long-term sustainability. To achieve the development ambition, we need to establish mechanisms for government, academia, media, civil society, and the private sector to access and use timely and actionable data to make informed decisions, enhance public accountability, identify risks and opportunities, and track progress, and more. Urgent need for transformation to achieve SDGs and long-term sustainability is needed. As we have heard at this forum, we can't be stuck in old planning boxes. We need to be dynamic and plan for the people that we leave little room for frequent breakdown, may it be pandemics or natural disasters, which affect not only our borders, but also the region and globally. Greater foresight and resource collaboration is needed for inclusive prosperity. This pandemic has reinforced that investing in people and systems pays off. We need a whole of society approach, and that is the way we can address the many challenges we face. Meaningful partnerships are ever more prominent at this juncture of development. Expansion of civic space, easy access to data and information is ever more crucial. It needs focused actions and realization of financial commitments to accelerate the process and to ensure equity. Leaving no one behind requires collaborative efforts. On behalf of the government of Maldives and our Honorable Minister Muhammad Aslam, I would like to once again thank UNESCAP, especially South and Southwest Asia Office of UNESCAP, Dr. Nagesh, Kumar and his team for opportunity to co-host this event. It was indeed our pleasure to play a key role in the forum at a time like this with many challenges. It reflects our commitment towards achieving SDGs. I would like also to thank our Honorable Minister Muhammad Aslam, whose guidance contributed to the success of this event. Also, the UN Resident Coordinator to Maldives, Mrs. Catherine Haswell, and her team for all their support. The very rich discussions have been enlightening, and I thank all the panelists and experts from the government, private sector, academia, and the civil society for your invaluable contribution. Thank you each and everyone who contributed to making this event a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Imad, for your valedictory speech. It was a very nice way to conclude the forum of the past 2 days, our discussions of the past 2 days. Now it remains for me to thank all the different groups of people that contributed to it. And I think, of course, our host, the government of Maldives, and especially the Honorable Minister, yourself, Mr. Ahmad, and the Ministry of National Planning. Your team supported us in everything, all the planning and executing this. Your chief statistician and the civil society representatives from Maldives have all very nicely contributed to the discussions. I must also say that before actually the SDG forum started yesterday, there was a preparatory process already on by the civil society organizations of South Asia. They got together on 22nd and 23rd, and they held a very vibrant People's Forum, South Asia People's Forum on SDGs. And I had an occasion to participate in it, and Honorable Foreign Minister of Nepal delivered a concluding remarks at that session when he was presented the findings. And so the statement by CSOs were prepared and agreed to, and they were shared in the different sessions of the SDG forum. So it was very much a multi-stakeholder exercise that began with the CSOs doing their homework and bringing the messages to the SDG forum. So I want to also use this occasion to thank our partners from civil society that are organized under Asia Pacific Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism of under SCAP, of which the South Asia part played a very important role in bringing the CSOs together. So it began there. And yesterday, the opening session, we were joined by the Honorable Minister of National Planning, Mr. Aslam. And I want to send our gratitude, deep gratitude to him through you, Mr. Imad. If you could kindly carry our deep appreciation from all of us to Honorable Minister. Yesterday, we were also joined by the Secretary Generals of SAARC and BIMSTEC, who brought very important messages and highlighted the importance of regional cooperation in these difficult times and what the SAARC and BIMSTEC are trying to do to address the challenges. And of course, UN resident coordinator from Maldives, Catherine Haswell joined, and our own executive secretary, delivered opening remarks. So it was very interesting. But what was also very interesting was the launch of the new, forum for sharing good practices at the session yesterday, and this is called South Asia Network on SDGs. And we had the messages from heads of think tanks and civil society organizations, which showed there is a lot of ownership of something like that. And we really look forward to making it a very vibrant forum and very vibrant channel for sharing good practices on SDG acceleration in the coming years, working with all the think tanks and civil society organizations. And then we went into this session, which took stock of progress made by different countries in South Asia on SDG achievements. And so all different countries brought and shared their voluntary national reviews. Some are going to present next year the second voluntary review, and some presented this year, and others have presented before. So that was very rich discussion to see what different governments are doing, especially in these difficult times after the onset of the or outbreak of the pandemic, to make sure that the progress on SDGs is not affected adversely by what has happened around us. And then the stimulus packages are actually delivered in a manner that also uphold the progress and accelerate the progress on SDGs. It was very, very interesting and useful to see what governments are doing. And today, the two roundtables have brought a richness of multi-stakeholder perspectives coming from all different sides, governments, civil society, the think tanks community, and the private sector, to discuss and debate on the job creating growth and social protection for addressing the challenges that we are facing, and on partnership and means of implementation. So altogether, it was a very rich discussion, I would say. Of course, this year it had to be done under a lot of constraints. We are not physically together. We are only virtually held together, and the time constraints have also been there. But I must say that everyone tried to address and accept and accommodate these constraints, and still bring the best that we are known for. And so I know that the South Asia SDG forums have become very vibrant platforms, very multi-stakeholder and vibrant platforms over the years. This year was a very challenging time, and so we had to do it virtually and compress the times. But hopefully next year, whole thing will change, and we will have more normal kind of meeting, and with with its characteristic of vibrancy of discussions and debate. So with that note, I want to really thank all of our speakers, resource persons, and moderators. I do not want to name them individually, but I must also say that we will take all the key messages from you as South Asia input for the APFSD, Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, and beyond to HLPF. But the message which is coming out, that we work together much more intensively, will be also really factored into our work planning for the next coming years. So we will be in touch with you to really implement some of the ideas that you have given for cooperation. For instance, in this session itself, the bringing together the chief statisticians together, at one table, would be something we would work about, and we can do that. And so on that note, I really want to thank everyone once again. And I must also say that tomorrow there is a special event uh, which is focused on disaster and climate resilience in South Asia. And honorable ministers of climate change, stroke disaster risk reduction are there, and the heads of 5 think tanks working on these matters will also be there. So it is going to be also a very important discussion which will continue tomorrow. So please do join us. Those of you who have not yet registered, please do so, and the link will be provided to you. So on that note, I want to thank you once again. Have a very nice evening, and we will remain in touch and remain engaged. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone.